Hi everyone, we are Nightmare Narratives and we are here to help you today. I know you will use this video to fall asleep before, so like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. It was a day that started like any other, except it didn't. I woke up to the faint sound of the wind howling outside and the familiar hum of the refrigerator vibrating through the thin walls of my apartment. But something was off. Something that didn't quite register in the fog of sleep clinging to my mind. My eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the morning light filtering through the blinds. A chill crawled up my spine, and that's when I saw it. The door to my bedroom was wide open. I never left my door open at night. In fact, I had a routine: lock the front door, check the windows, and always shut my bedroom door before I went to sleep. The feeling of safety, knowing that extra barrier was there, had become second nature. But now, the sight of the open door sent a rush of anxiety through my chest. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to the corners, half expecting to see something, someone lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, only the empty hallway beyond the door. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself it was just a strange accident. Maybe I didn't close it properly last night. Or perhaps there had been a draft. I swung my legs out of bed, the cold floor jolting me fully awake. But as I stood there, staring at the open door, that gnawing sense of unease didn't go away. I couldn't remember hearing anything in the night. No creaks, no footsteps. And yet, the door was wide open. With cautious steps, I walked over to the door, peering out into the hallway. My apartment was small. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, and my bedroom, so it wasn't difficult to see everything at once. Nothing seemed out of place, but then I noticed something strange. The front door. It was shut, but the lock, it wasn't engaged. I was sure I had locked it the night before. I always locked it. A cold wave of fear crashed over me. I stepped closer, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Slowly, I turned the knob and pulled the door open. The hallway outside was empty, silent, just like it always was. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no disturbances. But that didn't make me feel any better. If someone had entered my apartment in the middle of the night, how did they get in, and why leave without taking anything? I quickly shut the door, locking it this time, and backed away as if expecting someone to knock or barge in at any moment. I stood in the middle of my apartment, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it's just paranoia, I muttered to myself, though I didn't believe the words. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and checked the time. It was just after 7 a.m. I had work in a couple of hours, but there was no way I could focus after this. My hands hovered over the screen, debating whether I should call someone, maybe the police. But what would I say? My door was open, and I'm scared? No, they'd think I was overreacting. Instead, I texted my friend Jason, the one person I knew wouldn't dismiss my fear. Me? Hey, something weird happened. I woke up and my bedroom door was wide open. I know I closed it last night. His reply came within seconds. Jason, what? Are you sure? Maybe you just forgot. Me? I'm sure. And the front door wasn't locked either. There was a pause before his next message. Jason, that's not good. Did you hear anything last night? Me, no, nothing. I didn't hear anything. But now I feel like someone was in here. The phone remained silent for a minute before Jason sent his final text. Jason, you should check your apartment. Make sure nothing's missing. I can come by if you want. I looked around again, heart pounding, but everything seemed untouched. Still, I followed Jason's advice. I checked every room, every corner. My wallet was still on the counter, my keys hung on the hook by the door, and my laptop sat where I had left it the night before. Nothing appeared to be out of place, but as I returned to the living room, I stopped in my tracks. There, on the kitchen table, was something I hadn't noticed before, a small, folded piece of paper. I knew I hadn't left anything there. My breath hitched as I approached it, my hands shaking as I picked up the note. Unfolding it slowly, I stared at the words scribbled hastily in the center of the paper. I was here. I dropped the note, a cold dread filling my chest. Whoever had been in my apartment hadn't taken anything. They had left something behind. Something far worse than any missing item. A reminder that they could come back. I was no longer safe in my own home. I stood frozen in place, staring at the note with those 3 chilling words. I was here. My mind raced, trying to process what this meant. How could someone have entered my apartment without me noticing? The thought of someone walking through my space, standing next to my bed while I slept, made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone again, dialing Jason's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'm not sure," I replied, my voice shaky. "There's a note. Someone left a note on my table." "What?" Jason's tone shifted to alarm. "What does it say?" "I was here. That's all it says." "Jason, someone was in my apartment last night while I was sleeping." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Jason's breathing quicken. "I'm coming over right now. Don't touch anything else. Just stay where you are, okay?" "Okay," I whispered, feeling a bit of relief that I wouldn't be alone for much longer. I sat down on the couch, my eyes never leaving the note. Who could have done this? I replayed the night before in my head. I had come home from work around 8 p.m., locked the door, and settled into my usual routine. Watched some TV, ate a late dinner, and went to bed. I couldn't think of anything strange that had happened. No odd noises or out-of-place objects. Yet, someone had been in my home, and I hadn't heard a thing. It wasn't long before there was a knock at my door, and I jumped, my nerves still on edge. I rushed to the door, checking through the peephole before unlocking it to let Jason in. He stepped inside quickly, his eyes scanning the apartment. "Where's the note?" I pointed to the kitchen table, and he walked over to it, picking up the small piece of paper. His brow furrowed as he read the words. "This is messed up," he muttered. "Are you sure nothing's missing? Nothing else seems out of place?" I shook my head. "I've checked everywhere. Everything's still here, but the front door wasn't locked, and my bedroom door was open. I know I didn't leave them like that." Jason set the note down carefully, as if it might explode at any moment. "We should call the police?" "I thought about that," I said, pacing the room. "But what would I even tell them? There's no sign of a break-in, and nothing's gone. Just this creepy note. They still need to know," Jason insisted. "Even if it's just to make a report. This isn't something you can ignore." He was right. As much as I didn't want to involve the police, it felt like the only logical step. I couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened. Someone had been here. Someone who wanted me to know they had been here. I grabbed my phone again and dialed the non-emergency number for the police. After a few rings, a dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car pulled up outside my building, and 2 officers came to my door. Officer Jenkins, the older of the 2, seemed skeptical as I recounted the events, while Officer Ramirez, his partner, took notes. "So, you didn't hear anything at all during the night?" Jenkins asked, looking around the apartment. "No, nothing," I replied, feeling a bit defensive. "I'm a light sleeper, and I would have woken up if I heard someone moving around." Jenkins nodded, but didn't seem entirely convinced. "And nothing's missing?" "No, just the note." Officer Ramirez held up the paper, inspecting it carefully. "We can dust for fingerprints, but it's possible whoever left this was wearing gloves." Jason stood by quietly, his arms crossed, watching the officers work. "This isn't a prank, right?" he asked, breaking the silence. "No one you know would do something like this?" I shook my head firmly. "I don't think so. I can't think of anyone who would do this. It's too deliberate." The officers exchanged a look before Jenkins spoke again. "We'll file a report and take this with us for evidence. If anything else happens, anything at all, call us immediately." I nodded, though the reassurance felt hollow. They couldn't do much beyond the basics. They couldn't undo the fact that someone had invaded my space, violated my sense of security. After the officers left, Jason stayed behind, pacing the room with me. "You can't stay here alone tonight," he said firmly. "I don't like this, and I don't think it's safe." "I know," I admitted. "But where else am I supposed to go?" "You can crash at my place. I've got a guest room," Jason offered, his expression serious. "At least until we figure out what's going on." I wanted to argue, to tell him that everything would be fine and that I didn't need to be scared out of my own home. But deep down, I knew he was right. Staying here, especially after what had happened, didn't feel like an option. "Okay," I finally said. "Just for a few nights." Jason nodded. Let's grab some of your stuff, and we'll head over. As I packed a small bag, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Whoever had been in my apartment might be watching, waiting, and worst of all, I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. As we left the apartment, I cast one last glance at the door, locking it behind me. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew a lock wouldn't keep them out. Jason's apartment was only a few blocks away, but the walk there felt like miles. Every shadow seemed to stretch and reach toward me, every passing figure a potential threat. I clutched my overnight bag tighter, trying to focus on Jason's calm presence beside me. "You'll feel better once you're settled," he said quietly as we crossed the street. "It's just for a few nights, until we figure out what's going on." I nodded, though my thoughts were still stuck on the note. I was here. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky, as if written in a hurry. My mind conjured images of someone creeping through my apartment, their fingers brushing over my things, standing over my bed while I slept. We reached Jason's building, and he unlocked the front door, leading me up to his apartment on the 3rd floor. It was a cozy place, with warm lighting and a sense of safety I hadn't realized I needed so badly. "Make yourself at home," Jason said, dropping his keys on the kitchen counter. "I'll get you set up in the guest room." I followed him down the hall, glancing into the room where I'd be staying. It was simple but comfortable. A bed, a small desk, and a window that overlooked the quiet street below. "This should do for now," Jason said, turning to me. "You okay?" "Yeah, I think so," I replied, though my voice sounded hollow. I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. "I'll be right down the hall if you need anything," he added, "and we'll figure this out. I promise." I gave him a weak smile, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Jason. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Hey, don't worry about it. We're friends. This is what friends do." He left me to unpack, and I tried to settle in, but the unease from earlier followed me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside, watching. But the street was empty, just the occasional car passing by. I closed the curtains, trying to push the paranoia out of my mind. This was a safe space. I wasn't alone. Yet, as the night dragged on, sleep seemed impossible. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind against the window made me jump. I kept glancing toward the door, half expecting it to open on its own, revealing a shadowy figure on the other side. Hours passed, and I lay in the dark, wide awake. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound, a faint tapping. I sat up, heart pounding, listening intently. It came again. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from the window. I stared at the curtains, dread creeping up my spine. There was no way anyone could be outside on the 3rd floor. It had to be something else, a branch, the wind, anything but what my mind was imagining. But the tapping continued, slow and deliberate, as if someone were testing the window. I took a deep breath and slid out of bed, my bare feet barely making a sound on the floor. My heart was in my throat as I reached for the curtain, pulling it aside just enough to peek out. Nothing. No one was there. I let out a shaky breath and turned back toward the bed. But then I heard it again, tap, 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 this time louder. I whipped around, yanking the curtain open fully. The street below was empty. There were no branches near the window, no sign of anything that could have made the noise. I pressed my forehead against the glass, trying to convince myself it was all in my head, just leftover anxiety from the day. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing on the sidewalk directly below the window. They were still, their face hidden by the shadows, but I could feel their gaze on me, piercing through the glass. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring up at me. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to call Jason, but before I could dial, the figure turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing in the middle of the room, trembling. Jason burst into the room moments later, his expression frantic. "What's wrong? What happened?" "There was someone outside," I stammered, pointing toward the window. "They were just standing there, staring at me." Jason rushed to the window, looking out, but the street was empty. He scanned the area, his brow furrowed. "I don't see anyone." "They were there," I insisted, feeling a mix of fear and frustration. "I swear, Jason, I'm not imagining this. I believe you," he said softly, closing the curtains. "But whoever it was, they're gone now. You're safe." Safe. The word felt meaningless. Whoever had left that note, whoever had been inside my apartment, they weren't done with me. And now, they were getting closer. The next morning, the fear from the previous night still clung to me like a damp fog. Jason had stayed up most of the night, checking the locks and windows, reassuring me that we were safe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I woke up to the smell of coffee drifting through the apartment. My muscles were stiff from the tension, and my mind was foggy from lack of sleep. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake the lingering dread. Jason was in the kitchen when I joined him. He looked up from his mug, concern etched into his face. "You didn't sleep much, huh?" I shook my head. "Barely. I kept hearing noises, even though I know it's probably just the building." He nodded, setting his mug down. "I've been thinking, maybe we should go to the police. I know it seems extreme, but after everything, I don't know, Jason." The thought of explaining the bizarre situation to the police made me uncomfortable. What would I even say? That someone left a cryptic note in my apartment and stood outside my window in the middle of the night? I'm not sure they'll take me seriously. They have to. It's their job. I sipped my coffee, trying to find the words. I didn't want to dismiss Jason's concern, but part of me wasn't ready to involve the police yet. Not until I knew for sure what was happening. "Let's give it one more day," I said finally. "If anything else happens, I'll go to the police. I promise." Jason hesitated but then nodded. "All right, one more day. But we're staying vigilant." We spent most of the day in the apartment, Jason working from his laptop while I tried to distract myself with books and TV. But every noise outside the window, every creak in the floorboards, set my nerves on edge. My mind kept drifting back to the figure on the street and the feeling that I was being watched. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted again. Jason ordered pizza, and we settled into the living room, trying to unwind. I tried to convince myself that things would be normal tonight, that the events of the past couple of days were just random coincidences. But deep down, I knew better. As the night stretched on, Jason started to doze off on the couch. I wasn't far behind, my eyelids growing heavy. But just as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text. I picked up my phone, expecting a message from a friend or maybe a spam text. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me, standing in Jason's kitchen, taken just moments ago. I gasped, dropping the phone as if it had burned me. Jason stirred, sitting up. "What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone again, my heart pounding in my chest. The photo stared back at me, a snapshot of me from behind, taken through the kitchen window. "I got this," I whispered, showing Jason the screen. His face paled as he saw the image. How? How did they get that?" "They're watching us, Jason." My voice trembled as I looked toward the window, half expecting to see a face staring back at me from the darkness. But the curtains were closed, and the street outside seemed still. Jason stood up abruptly, grabbing his phone. "That's it. We're calling the police." I didn't argue this time. The photo was proof that someone was watching us, someone who had gotten close enough to take a picture without us even realizing. Jason dialed the police, his voice tense as he explained the situation. I sat on the couch, staring at the photo, the unsettling feeling of being hunted growing stronger by the second. My mind raced with questions. Who was doing this? Why me? How had they followed me to Jason's apartment? The police arrived within minutes, 2 officers stepping into the living room. One was a stern-looking man in his 40s, while the other was a younger woman with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room. Jason explained everything about the note, the figure outside the window, and now the photo. The officers listened carefully, asking a few questions here and there, but I could tell they were skeptical. "So you never actually saw the person who took the photo?" the older officer asked, his tone measured. I shook my head. "No, but they've been following me. I found a note in my apartment. It said, 'I was here.'" The younger officer glanced at her partner, her expression unreadable. "Do you still have the note?" "Yes, it's in my bag." I retrieved it, handing it to her. She studied the shaky handwriting before passing it back. "We'll file a report," the older officer said, "but without any concrete evidence, there's not much we can do at this point." I felt a surge of frustration. Someone took a picture of me in this apartment. How is that not concrete evidence? The younger officer gave me a sympathetic look. "We understand how frightening this is, but we need more to go on. We'll patrol the area tonight, see if we spot anything unusual. In the meantime, make sure all your windows and doors are locked." They left shortly after, leaving me and Jason alone in the tense silence. He turned to me, his jaw clenched. "This isn't right. They should be doing more." "I know," I whispered, still clutching my phone. "But what can we do? Whoever this is, they're watching, and we don't know when they'll strike again." Jason paced the room, his face dark with anger and worry. "We'll figure this out. We have to." But as I looked out the window into the shadowy night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every distant sound from the street sent my heart racing. I lay in bed, wide awake, my mind swirling with thoughts of the photo, the figure in the street, and the cryptic note. Jason was restless too, tossing and turning beside me. At some point in the early hours, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the faint glow of dawn was creeping through the curtains. The anxiety from the night before still clung to me, but the daylight brought a fragile sense of security. I sat up, blinking against the light, and for a moment, I thought maybe the worst was over. Maybe it was just a sick prank, and the person had moved on. But then I saw it. On the nightstand, propped up against my phone, was another note. My blood turned to ice as I stared at the folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my stomach churning with dread. I unfolded the note slowly, half hoping it was just my imagination, that this was some leftover scrap from the first message. But it wasn't. In the same jagged handwriting, it said, "I'm closer than you think." I gasped, stumbling back against the headboard, my pulse roaring in my ears. Jason shot up at the sound, his eyes darting to me, then to the note in my hands. "What is it?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep and concern. Wordlessly, I handed him the note. He read it, his face growing pale. How did they get in here?" I shook my head, too terrified to speak. The windows had been locked, the doors secure. We hadn't heard a single sound during the night. Yet somehow, they'd gotten inside. They'd left a note right next to where we slept, without either of us waking up. Jason jumped out of bed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This isn't possible. I checked everything last night. Everything was locked." I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking. "Whoever it is, they're inside. They've been inside." His face twisted with fury. "That's it. We're getting out of here. Now." He grabbed his phone, calling the police again, while I hurriedly packed a few things into a bag. My hands fumbled with the zipper, my mind racing. Where will we go? How could we escape someone who could break into a locked apartment without a trace? The police arrived within minutes, the same 2 officers from the night before. They inspected the apartment, searching for any signs of forced entry, but found nothing. No broken locks, no disturbed windows. It was as if the intruder had walked through the walls. "This doesn't make sense," the older officer muttered, rubbing his chin. "It's like they're taunting us." Jason snapped, his frustration mounting. "They're playing some sick game, and we're sitting ducks here." The younger officer approached me, her expression softer than her partner's. "Do you have any idea who could be doing this? Anyone with a grudge. Someone who might be following you." I shook my head. "No one. I don't know why this is happening." She nodded, glancing at her partner. "We'll increase patrols around the building, but I think it's best if you both stay somewhere else for the time being, just in case." Jason didn't need convincing. We packed up our things and left the apartment within the hour, the officers promising to keep an eye on the place. But as we drove away, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. No matter where we went, I knew we wouldn't be safe. Jason and I decided to stay at a hotel across town. It was a small, nondescript place, the kind where no one asked questions and the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbors arguing late into the night. It wasn't exactly comforting, but it was better than staying in the apartment. We spent most of the day holed up in the room, keeping the curtains drawn and the TV on for background noise. Jason tried to keep things light, cracking jokes and ordering takeout, but I could see the tension in his eyes. He was just as scared as I was, even if he didn't want to admit it. By evening, I felt like I was on the verge of breaking down. The fear had been building for days, and I hadn't had a moment to breathe. Every second felt like I was waiting for the next terrifying thing to happen. And in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still coming. Jason was in the bathroom, brushing his teeth, when my phone buzzed. I stared at it for a moment, dread creeping up my spine. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see another message, another taunt from the person who had invaded my life. But I had to. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone and unlocked it. The text was short, just 2 words. Found you. My breath caught in my throat. My heart pounded as I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, watching me. I ran to the bathroom, my voice barely a whisper. Jason. He turned to me, concern flashing across his face. What's wrong? I showed him the phone, the message glaring back at us like a threat. His jaw clenched. How? How could they have found us here? I don't know, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. But they did. Jason grabbed his jacket, his eyes wild. We have to go. Now. We rushed out of the hotel, leaving everything behind. As we ran to the car, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me, the creeping sense that no matter how fast we ran, we couldn't escape. Whoever was after us, they were always one step ahead. The car sped through the quiet streets, Jason's knuckles white on the steering wheel. The hotel disappeared behind us, swallowed by the darkened landscape. I sat in the passenger seat, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely think straight. The text echoed in my mind. Found you. How? How could this person know where we were at every turn? It was as if they could read our minds, anticipate every move. The walls of safety were crumbling around us, and I was drowning in fear. Jason didn't say a word. His face was tense, jaw locked, as he drove us through the empty streets. After a while, he turned onto a back road, leading us further away from the city. Where are we going? I finally asked, my voice shaking. Away from here, he muttered. Just far enough that no one can follow. But they always seem to find us, I whispered, my voice catching. How are we supposed to get away if they always know where we are? He didn't answer. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. The road stretched out before us, dark and endless. Trees lined the sides, their tall shadows reaching out like fingers in the night. I watched the trees pass, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. But the tension between us only grew. We were running blind, without a plan, and that terrified me. Finally, Jason pulled over at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. The place looked abandoned, just an old gas station with flickering lights and a diner that had seen better days. We'll stop here for a bit, Jason said, exhaling heavily, just to figure out our next move. I nodded, too exhausted to argue. We stepped out of the car, and I stretched, trying to shake off the anxiety that clung to me like a second skin. Jason walked toward the gas station to see if anyone was inside, and I stayed by the car, pacing back and forth. The night was eerily silent, the wind whispering through the trees. As I stood there, I felt the familiar chill of being watched. My skin prickled, and I glanced around, heart racing. No one was there. The parking lot was empty, the road deserted. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing second. That's when I saw it. Across the road, at the edge of the trees, a figure stood in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted, trying to make out the shape. It was hard to tell in the darkness, but they were tall, taller than any person I'd seen. And they were watching me. I could feel their gaze, heavy and suffocating, even from a distance. My legs froze, rooted to the ground. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come out. My mind raced, telling me to run, to get back to the car, but I couldn't move. Then the figure stepped forward. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if they wanted me to see them. The dim light from the gas station flickered over them, and my blood ran cold. It was the same figure from the photo, the one standing in the street, the one watching me from a distance. They were here. My body finally responded, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my feet. Jason, I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. Jason appeared from the gas station, alarmed. What? What is it? I pointed toward the trees, my voice trembling. They're here. The person who's been following us. They're right there. He turned, squinting into the darkness, but the figure was gone. The trees swayed gently in the wind, as if nothing had been there at all. I don't see anything, Jason said, his voice tense. I swear they were there. I insisted, my heart still racing. Right at the edge of the woods. Jason's eyes narrowed, scanning the area. Get back in the car. Now. I didn't need to be told twice. I rushed to the passenger seat, slamming the door behind me, my entire body trembling. Jason slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors. I don't know how they keep finding us, he muttered, gripping the steering wheel. But we need to leave. We can't stay here. Just as he started the engine, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, dread filling my veins. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But I did. It was another text, and this time it was worse than anything before. You can't hide from me. We sped down the highway again, the air thick with fear and silence. I could barely keep my thoughts straight. Every mile that passed felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment they would catch up with us again. We reached a small town a couple of hours later, far away from where we started. Jason pulled into a cheap motel on the outskirts, hoping we could finally lose whoever was after us. The night manager didn't ask any questions, handing us the key with a blank stare. We made our way to the room, locking the door behind us and barricading it with a chair. I collapsed on the bed, too exhausted to keep my eyes open any longer. Jason sat by the window, staring out at the empty parking lot, watching for any sign of movement. Get some rest, he said softly. I'll keep watch, but rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel those unseen eyes on me, watching, waiting. Hours passed. The night dragged on, suffocating in its stillness. And just as I was drifting into an uneasy sleep, I heard it. A knock. It was faint, barely audible, but it sent a jolt of terror through me. I sat up, heart pounding, as the knock came again, this time louder. Jason stood, his face pale as he approached the door. Don't open it, I whispered, my voice shaking. But it was too late. Jason peered through the peephole, his breath catching. What is it? I asked, dread tightening around my chest. He turned to me, his face ashen. There's no one there. Another knock. Louder. Closer. And then a voice, low and chilling, whispered from the other side of the door. You can't run forever. The nightmare was far from over. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. I never thought much about privacy in my own home. It was a sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and leave the chaos of the world behind. But one day, that sense of security was shattered. It started with the feeling of being watched. At first, I brushed it off, chalking it up to paranoia from too many late nights binge-watching crime documentaries. But the sensation didn't go away. It only grew stronger. No matter where I was in the house, I felt as though unseen eyes were tracking my every move. My skin would prickle, my heart would race, and I'd glance around only to see nothing unusual. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The turning point came one evening as I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. My living room had large windows, but they were always covered by thick curtains at night. That evening, as the unease gnawed at me, I glanced up and noticed a faint flicker of light from one of the corners of the ceiling. It was subtle, barely there, but my mind immediately raced with possibilities. Maybe it's a reflection from outside, I thought. But when I parted the curtains to check, the street outside was dark and empty. The flicker remained. I decided to ignore it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I climbed onto the couch and ran my hand along the ceiling near where I'd seen the light. My fingertips brushed against something small and metallic, a tiny lens hidden between the ceiling beams. My heart pounded in my chest as I pulled away and stared in disbelief. There was no mistaking it. It was a camera, hidden so perfectly that I wouldn't have noticed if not for that single flicker. How long had it been there? Who had put it in my home? And, most disturbingly, what had it seen? The question swirled in my mind, and panic began to set in. I searched the rest of the house in a frenzy, checking every corner, nook, and cranny. To my horror, I found two more cameras, equally well concealed. One was in the kitchen, aimed at the dining area, and the other in the hallway, watching my every step as I moved between rooms. I felt violated in ways I couldn't describe. The idea that someone had been spying on me, in the place I considered my safest refuge, was enough to make my skin crawl. But the worst part was yet to come, the recordings. As I stood frozen in my living room, the implications of what I had discovered settled heavily on my chest. The idea that someone had invaded my personal space without my knowledge felt like a lead weight. I glanced at the spot where the camera had been, an inconspicuous object that had transformed my sanctuary into a potential stage for someone else's twisted entertainment. How long had it been there? What had it captured? That evening, as I tried to distract myself with television, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, sent a chill down my spine. The comforting glow of the screen seemed insufficient to ward off the shadows lurking in the corners of my mind. My imagination spiraled, conjuring up scenarios where someone had witnessed my most intimate moments, laughing at my vulnerability. Determined to regain some semblance of control, I resolved to investigate further. I grabbed my phone and began searching for any local news reports about hidden cameras or similar incidents. The results were a mix of horror stories and cautionary tales. I felt a twinge of paranoia creep in as I read through accounts of others who had experienced invasions of privacy. Had they felt as exposed as I did now? My heart raced as I skimmed through the headlines, one in particular catching my eye. Local woman discovers hidden cameras in her home. My breath hitched in my throat as I clicked on the article, desperate for any clues that might help me understand my own situation. The piece described how the woman had found multiple cameras strategically placed around her house, and how they had been broadcasting live footage online to an audience of voyeurs. The similarities were uncanny. Just like her, I had a gut feeling that something was off, but unlike her, I was determined to find out who was behind this violation of my space. I decided it was time to inspect my apartment more thoroughly. Armed with a flashlight, I began scouring every corner, every nook and cranny. I turned over furniture, checked behind picture frames, and peered into cabinets. The tension in my muscles was palpable, and each shadow felt as if it were alive, taunting me with the secrets it might hold. In the bathroom, my heart raced as I examined the small vent above the shower. I had never paid much attention to it before, but something about the position felt wrong. As I reached up to check, I noticed that the vent cover was slightly askew. My pulse quickened as I pried it open, only to be met with darkness. Just as I was about to give up, something metallic clinked to the floor, catching my eye. I picked it up, and my breath caught in my throat as I realized it was a small camera lens. Panic surged through me, and I dropped it as if it were burning hot. My mind raced with possibilities. Had I been filmed in my most private moments? Who had done this? Shaking, I left the bathroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed help, but who could I trust? Should I go to the police? Tell my friends? The fear of judgment loomed over me, but the weight of the violation was heavier. I wanted to scream, to break something, to unleash the whirlwind of emotions trapped inside me. After a sleepless night filled with anxiety and paranoia, I decided to take action. I would gather evidence, confront this violation head-on, and reclaim my life. But before I could make any moves, I knew I had to be smart. I set up a makeshift surveillance system of my own, a series of cameras around my home, ensuring that I was always one step ahead. Little did I know, this would only be the beginning of a terrifying game of cat and mouse. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and determination. Each time I walked through my apartment, the sense of being watched lingered, suffocating and relentless. I could almost feel the eyes that had scrutinized my life from the shadows, their gaze burning into my skin. I couldn't let this go on. I had to take control. I installed my makeshift surveillance system over the weekend, transforming my apartment into a fortress of cameras, strategically placed in every corner. It was empowering to see the blinking red lights signaling that I was now the one watching. As I powered up the system, a sense of safety washed over me. At least now, I had a chance to catch whoever had been invading my space. But even with my newfound resolve, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still vulnerable. Every time I sat down to review the footage, my heart raced. I would press play, expecting the worst, as if I were peeling back the layers of a horror movie. I watched my life unfold through the lens of my cameras, the mundane moments taking on a sinister undertone. Hours turned into days as I combed through the footage, scrutinizing every frame for signs of intrusion. Each tick of the clock felt like a countdown to something inevitable. I had set up my cameras to capture any movement, hoping to unveil the hidden watcher lurking in the shadows. The process was exhausting, leaving me emotionally drained as I oscillated between feelings of dread and moments of false hope. One evening, as I sifted through hours of footage, I noticed something peculiar. In one of the clips from the living room, I could see the shadow of someone passing outside my window. My breath caught in my throat as I paused the video, rewinding and playing it back. The figure moved quickly, almost too swiftly to capture a clear image. It was late, and the streets were empty. The sight sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I leaned closer to the screen, studying the shadowy silhouette. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it be the person responsible for the cameras? What if they had been watching me all along, lurking just outside, biding their time? I felt a surge of panic and turned to my window, half expecting to see the figure standing there, watching me in return. But the street was empty, the only sound the rustling leaves outside. Still, the unsettling thought that I was being stalked seeped into my mind, worming its way into my thoughts until I could think of nothing else. I had to confront this head-on, determined to gather more evidence. I began to reach out to others who had experienced similar invasions. I connected with an online support group where people shared their stories of hidden cameras, stalking, and the fear that came with those violations. Hearing their tales both comforted and terrified me. I was not alone, but the reality of such experiences was sobering. Among the group, I met Mia, a woman whose home had been infiltrated by a hidden camera while she was away. Her bravery in sharing her story inspired me to be more proactive. She mentioned how she had installed security measures in her home and even sought help from local authorities, despite her initial fear of judgment. Her words ignited a spark of courage within me. I knew I had to do the same. That night, I drafted a message to the police, detailing everything I had discovered and my fears. My heart raced as I hit send, the weight of vulnerability settling back onto my shoulders. I didn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as I waited for a response. In the early hours, my phone buzzed, a notification illuminating the dark room. It was a reply from Officer Roberts, a local investigator who had dealt with similar cases. He asked if I could come in for a discussion. After a few anxious moments, I decided to take the plunge. I needed support, and perhaps Officer Roberts could provide insider guidance. Arriving at the station felt surreal. I recounted my experience to Officer Roberts, his expression shifting from concern to understanding as I spoke. He listened intently, jotting down notes, and when I finished, he assured me that he would look into my case personally. As I left the station, a mixture of relief and anxiety washed over me. For the first time, I felt that I was not alone in this battle. But deep down, I knew that the most challenging part lay ahead. Later that night, as I reviewed the footage again, I caught another glimpse of the shadow outside my window. This time, it lingered longer, as if it was waiting for something, waiting for me. A chill ran down my spine as I quickly shut off the monitor, closing my eyes and trying to suppress the mounting dread. Could I confront the stranger? What if they came for me? I had to face the fear that clung to me like a second skin. The following days felt like a slow descent into madness. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside, sent shivers down my spine. I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, peering through the curtains every few minutes to check for any sign of movement outside. The shadow had become an unwelcome specter in my life, haunting my thoughts and taunting my sanity. Despite the overwhelming anxiety, I remained vigilant, determined to uncover the truth. I replayed the footage of the shadow, analyzing every detail. Each time, I was met with the same vague outline, indistinct yet undeniably human. It seemed to have an uncanny ability to elude the camera, moving just outside the frame or blurring into the night. I needed more than vague outlines. I needed proof. After days of relentless observation, my resolve hardened. It was time to confront my fears head-on. I began to plan my next steps with meticulous detail. Armed with my phone, a flashlight, and a sense of determination, I set out one night to monitor the area outside my apartment. I dressed in dark clothes to blend into the night, and with each step down the hallway, I felt a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins. My heart thudded in my chest as I reached the front door, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I pushed those thoughts aside, recalling Mia's story and the strength she had shown. Stepping outside, I was enveloped in darkness, the street lights casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. The air was still, almost too quiet, amplifying every sound: the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of cars, the soft thud of my own heartbeat. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders as I moved toward the edge of the sidewalk, where I had last seen the shadow. As I stood there, straining to see into the depths of the night, my eyes caught a flicker of movement in the shadows. It was brief, a mere flicker at the corner of my vision, but it sent a jolt of adrenaline rushing through me. I turned my head, trying to focus, my breath quickening as I saw the shape again. It was more defined this time, standing partially hidden behind a tree. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of something shiny, perhaps a reflection of light from a camera or a phone. I couldn't turn back now. This was my chance. I took a cautious step forward, my heart pounding in my ears, adrenaline propelling me closer. The figure remained still, as if it were aware of my presence, but chose not to move. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice quaking slightly despite my attempts to sound commanding. Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The figure didn't flinch. It stood there, cloaked in shadows. I could see the outline of a hooded jacket and the unmistakable glint of something metallic in its hand. As I neared, the figure finally shifted, stepping partially into the light. My breath hitched in my throat as I recognized the familiar features of a face I had seen before, someone from the support group. "Mark?" I exclaimed, confusion swirling in my mind. He smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice smooth yet laced with an unsettling calm. "I was just keeping an eye on things." My mind raced. Was he following me? Had he been watching me too? "What are you doing here?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling. "I heard about your situation. I wanted to help," he replied, stepping closer. "You can't be too careful these days, right? With everything that's happening." He trailed off, his gaze flickering toward the shadows. I thought it would be good to have a friend close by. A sickening feeling crept into my stomach. I didn't know how to feel about this sudden appearance. Was he genuinely concerned, or was he just another threat? I took a step back, putting distance between us. "I appreciate the concern, but I think I can handle it on my own." He chuckled softly, but there was an edge to it that made my skin crawl. "Handling it alone is dangerous, you know? You have to be vigilant. You can't trust anyone." "Then why should I trust you?" I shot back, adrenaline flooding my system. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to protect you," he insisted, the intensity of his gaze unnerving me. "I can help you. I have experience with these kinds of situations." He took another step closer, his presence suddenly feeling suffocating. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from this man whose intentions felt murky and ominous. "Stay away from me," I shouted, raising the flashlight in defense. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm just trying to help. You need to understand that this world is filled with dangers you can't see. You think you know who's watching you, but there are things you haven't even imagined." I turned to leave, heart racing as I retreated back toward my apartment. "Get away from me, Mark," I called over my shoulder, pushing through the door and locking it behind me. Breathless, I leaned against the door, trying to collect my thoughts. The encounter had left me shaken. I felt the weight of his gaze lingering even after he was gone. I could hardly process what had just happened. Who was this man, really? The shadow of my fear had morphed into something tangible, something real. and it terrified me. I couldn't shake the feeling that my situation was spiraling out of control. I needed to find a way to reclaim my sense of safety and sanity. The encounter with Mark left me in a state of heightened anxiety. I spent the next few days trapped in a cycle of paranoia, convinced that I was being watched not just by the shadow lurking outside, but also by Mark. Each sound in my apartment felt magnified, echoing through the silence like a warning bell. I avoided looking out the window, fearful of catching another glimpse of Mark, or worse, the shadow. I canceled plans with friends and avoided going out, cloistering myself in my apartment. I worked remotely, keeping my curtains drawn tight, convinced that any light or movement could betray my presence. I started wearing headphones even while I was home, drowning out the world in a bid to calm my racing thoughts. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from my support group, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. I felt disconnected from everyone, isolated in my fears. I began to scrutinize every notification, every beep, convinced it was somehow connected to the shadow or Mark. Late one night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, I heard a soft rustling sound outside my window. My heart dropped into my stomach and I froze. The noise continued, faint but persistent, and I felt the air grow heavy around me. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, creeping toward the window. I felt like a prey animal, every instinct screaming to flee. Peering through the blinds, I strained to see anything out of the ordinary. But the night was dark and still, save for the occasional flicker of a streetlight casting eerie shadows on the pavement. Then suddenly I spotted him. Mark stood at the edge of the sidewalk, partially obscured by the shadows, his eyes fixed on my window. The sight sent a chill racing down my spine. What was he doing? Had he been watching me this whole time? My heart pounded, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Desperate to remain unseen, I ducked back from the window, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I crouched low, trying to steady myself. What did he want? Did he know something I didn't? My mind raced with possibilities as I backed away from the window, trying to put distance between myself and the terrifying reality unfolding outside. I felt trapped, like a caged animal with no way out. The idea of confronting him was unbearable. My pulse quickened as I considered my options. Should I call the police? But what could I tell them? I didn't even know if he posed a real threat. The paranoia tightened its grip on me, making it hard to think clearly. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from an unknown number. My heart raced as I opened it, and a cold shiver coursed through me. "I'm watching you." Panic gripped me. Who was it? Was it Mark, or was it someone else? The message felt like a punch to the gut, solidifying the dread that had been creeping in for days. I felt like a character in a horror movie, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. I couldn't stay there. I had to get out. My mind screamed at me to flee, to escape this suffocating feeling of entrapment. I grabbed my keys and slipped on my shoes, heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. I had to do something, anything, to regain control. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, my senses were on high alert. I moved swiftly down the hallway, glancing back nervously as I descended the stairs. My heart raced with every step, fear propelling me forward. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, but I had to push through it. The street outside was dimly lit, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. I started walking, my feet carrying me instinctively toward the nearest cafe that was open late. The familiar hum of life felt like a balm, a temporary escape from the growing dread. But as I walked, the sense of being followed prickled at my skin. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Mark lurking behind me. The streets felt foreign and menacing in the darkness. Every passerby became a potential threat, every car a possible omen. As I reached the cafe, the warm light spilling from the windows felt like a sanctuary. I pushed the door open, the bell above chiming as I stepped inside. The aroma of coffee and pastries enveloped me, a welcome distraction from the fear that had consumed me. I ordered a coffee, my hands shaking as I clutched the cup. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to relax. I glanced around, half expecting to see Mark slip through the door, but he didn't appear. Instead, I noticed the barista, a young woman with kind eyes, watching me with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I hesitated, contemplating whether to confide in a stranger. "I think someone's watching me," I finally admitted, my voice trembling. She frowned, concern deepening in her gaze. "Do you want me to call someone? A friend? The police?" "No, it's okay," I replied, shaking my head. "I just need to collect my thoughts." After a few minutes of silence, I felt slightly calmer. I sipped my coffee, allowing its warmth to seep into my bones. Just when I thought I could breathe again, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it, my heart sinking as I saw another message from the unknown number. "You can't hide from me." The world around me faded, the cafe noises dimming to a dull roar. My hands trembled as I typed back, desperate to regain some semblance of control. "Who are you?" I sent, my heart racing as I hit send. The response was immediate. "Someone who knows your secrets." I dropped my phone, the shock coursing through me like electricity. I needed to leave, to get back home where I could lock the door and barricade myself away from this nightmare. As I stood up, the barista looked at me with concern. "Are you sure you're okay? You don't look well." "I'm fine," I managed to reply, forcing a smile. "I just need to go home." I walked back into the night, every step feeling like a countdown to disaster. I had to figure out who was watching me and why. The walk back to my apartment was a blur of anxiety and dread. Each shadow seemed to stretch and twist into the figure of someone lurking, waiting to pounce. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, desperate to reach the safety of my home. I turned a corner, scanning the street for any sign of Mark or the hidden watcher. Nothing felt safe anymore, not even the familiar streets I had walked countless times before. As I reached my apartment building, I hesitated before stepping inside. The hallway felt suffocating, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead like warning signals. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the corners. The air was thick with tension, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I hurried to my door, fumbling with my keys as I tried to quiet my racing thoughts. I finally unlocked the door and stepped inside, locking it firmly behind me. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself. But even in the safety of my own home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned on all the lights, flooding my apartment with brightness. The shadows receded, but the feeling of unease remained. I checked the windows and doors, ensuring everything was locked tight before sinking onto my couch. My mind raced as I considered my next steps. I needed to figure out who was behind the messages. I grabbed my laptop and opened it, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I searched for advice on dealing with stalkers and anonymous threats. The more I read, the more overwhelmed I felt. There were so many stories of victims who had been tormented for far too long, and I didn't want to become one of them. Just then, my phone buzzed again, making me jump. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The unknown number flashed ominously. I took a deep breath, trying to summon my courage. "You're not alone. I'm always here," the message read. Panic surged within me. I felt the walls closing in, the suffocating presence of whoever was tormenting me closing in like a vice. I couldn't let this continue. I grabbed my phone and typed back furiously, "Stop. Who are you? What do you want?" No response came. I glanced at the time. It was getting late. I needed to get some rest, to think clearly, but sleep felt like an impossible dream. I set my phone down, its screen glowing ominously in the darkened room, and headed to the bathroom to splash some water on my face. As I stared at my reflection in the mirror, the lingering fear gnawed at me. I could almost hear the whispers of my thoughts echoing in my head. What if Mark was just the tip of the iceberg? What if there were others involved in this torment? I turned the water off and looked down at the floor. And that's when I saw it. A tiny, dark stain marred the otherwise pristine white tiles. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it sent a chill down my spine. I leaned closer, squinting to get a better look. It wasn't just a stain. It was fresh, oozing a sinister aura that made my stomach churn. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself. I grabbed some paper towels and tried to scrub it away, but the stain seemed to resist. Instead of fading, it seemed to deepen, spreading slowly like ink on paper. No, 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 I muttered, panic rising again. I stepped back, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. How could this have gotten here? Had someone been in my apartment while I was out? The thought sent waves of nausea coursing through me. I stumbled back into the living room, my heart racing. I had to check again to make sure everything was still locked, to ensure no one had slipped in while I was lost in my own head. I approached the front door cautiously, hand trembling as I checked the locks. Everything was secure. I moved to the windows, ensuring they were all shut tight. But as I drew the curtains back, I caught sight of something in the corner of my eye. I stepped closer to the window, my breath hitching as I spotted a faint figure across the street. It was Mark, standing in the same spot as before, but now his face was turned toward me, a twisted smile stretching across his lips. My heart plummeted, panic flooding my system. I backed away from the window, but it felt as if his gaze pierced right through me. I felt the air grow thick and heavy, the weight of his gaze suffocating. I needed a call for help. I rushed back to my phone, hands shaking as I dialed 911. I barely managed to hold it together as I waited for someone to pick up. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice asked. There's someone watching me. I think he's been in my house. I need help. I stammered, my voice cracking under the weight of my fear. Can you give me your address? The operator asked. I quickly rattled off my address, feeling the heat of panic rising in my chest. I glanced back at the window, but Mark was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. My breath quickened as I waited for the operator to respond. Help is on the way. Stay on the line with me, the operator said. Is the suspect still there? No, he was just here. I saw him. I gasped, struggling to make sense of it all. Are you safe inside your home? Is everything locked? The operator asked, their voice steady. Yes. I locked everything, but I don't know if I'm safe. I replied, feeling the walls closing in again. Just stay calm. Help is coming. Can you tell me what the person looks like? Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed from the hallway outside my apartment, making me jump. My heart raced as I glanced toward the door, dread pooling in my stomach. The operator's voice cut through my panic. Stay on the line with me. What was that noise? I don't know. Someone's outside. I glanced at my front door, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the banging continued, more forceful this time, as if someone were trying to break in. I backed away, adrenaline surging through me as I pressed my back against the wall. Please help, I whispered, trembling. Stay quiet. Don't open the door, and don't let them know you're there, the operator instructed, their voice unwavering. The banging intensified, shaking the door in its frame. I could hear muffled voices from the other side, one of them low and gruff, echoing through the thin walls of my apartment. Open up. We know you're in there, the voice called out, sending chills racing down my spine. Panic flooded my veins as the voice boomed from the other side of the door. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath as the footsteps grew closer, their weight heavy against the floorboards. The operator's voice was a distant murmur, urging me to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Who were they? Was Mark with them? Open up. We know you're in there, the voice repeated, more insistent this time. I felt a wave of terror wash over me. What did they want? Were they here for me? I glanced at my phone, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but I had no time. I needed to think. I turned to my kitchen, glancing around for something. Anything that I could use to defend myself. A knife? A frying pan? As I tiptoed towards the kitchen, the door shook violently as someone slammed into it. I gasped, the sound reverberating in my chest. My mind raced as I grabbed a heavy frying pan, the cold metal grounding me for just a moment. Please, I'm calling the police, I shouted, trying to project my voice, but the tremor betrayed my fear. Your little game is over. Open the door, the voice yelled again, punctuated by another heavy thud. I gripped the frying pan tightly, my knuckles white against the metal. The fear had morphed into a desperate determination. I had to fight back if they got in. I looked toward the window, weighing my options. Could I escape? But what if they were already waiting for me outside? My heart raced as the pounding continued, relentless and unyielding. Suddenly, the front door rattled violently, the hinges creaking ominously. I could hear the low murmurs of voices on the other side, and it felt as if the world around me was closing in. My breath quickened, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but you need to leave," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you." The door shook again, this time with a force that rattled the frame. I jumped back, my heart pounding against my ribs. I could hear the whispers more clearly now, but they were no longer words. They were taunts, the voices blending into an incomprehensible chorus that sent shivers down my spine. "Open up, let's play," one of them said, the voice dripping with malice. Just then, the sound of sirens pierced the night, their wails echoing in the distance. My heart leapt with hope. Help is coming, I thought desperately, but I couldn't let them know that I had called the police. Just a little longer. Just wait, I muttered under my breath, praying that they would leave before help arrived. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Time's running out, they jeered, and the mocking laughter sent chills crawling over my skin. I took a deep breath, my grip tightening around the frying pan. I couldn't let fear consume me. I had to be brave for myself, for whoever might be out there. The banging stopped suddenly, and I strained to hear. The voices quieted, replaced by an eerie silence that settled heavily in the air. My heart raced, pounding loudly in my ears. I felt a tingle of dread creep up my spine. What were they doing? Were they waiting for me to make a move? I pressed my ear against the door, straining to catch any sound. A hushed whisper reached my ears, followed by a soft, rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from the other side. I recoiled, feeling an ice-cold wave of dread wash over me. They're trying to get in, I thought, panic rising again as I prepared myself to defend against whatever might happen next. I steadied my breath, trying to calm the racing of my heart. Suddenly, the sound of sirens grew louder, and the thuds against my door intensified. "Open up, we need to talk," the voice shouted again, this time more frenzied. In that moment, I knew I had to act. I darted back to my phone, my fingers shaking as I held it close. I needed to call 911 again and let them know how close I was to being discovered. "Please, please stay away," I whispered into the phone. "They're trying to get in. Stay on the line. Help is just a few minutes away," the operator replied, their voice steady and calm. As I clutched the phone tightly, the door suddenly jolted again, and I braced myself for whatever would come next. The sound of splintering would fill the air as the intruders pressed against the door, testing its strength. "Help! Please hurry!" I cried out, adrenaline surging through me. The pounding continued, and I knew that they wouldn't stop until they got in. Then, in a sudden moment of clarity, I remembered the window. I dashed toward the kitchen, glancing back at the door as the thuds grew louder. My heart raced as I reached the window, fumbling to pull it open. Just as I got it ajar, I heard a loud crash, followed by a roar of laughter from the intruders. "You think you can escape? This way. Over here," someone shouted. I could hear their footsteps racing toward me as I climbed through the window. The cool night air hit my face, invigorating me with the desire to run. I threw my leg over the sill and tumbled to the ground, hitting the grass hard. Without looking back, I sprinted down the side of the building, heart racing as the adrenaline coursed through my body. I could hear their shouts behind me, their laughter echoing in the night. "Get her! Don't let her get away!" I rounded the corner of my building, glancing back only once to see shadows darting through the window, their figures stark against the dim light of my apartment. I sprinted towards the street, desperate for escape. But before I could reach the sidewalk, a hand shot out from the shadows, grabbing my arm with a grip like iron. I screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the roaring laughter. "You think you can run?" a voice taunted, pulling me back into the darkness. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the grip that held me firmly in place. I could feel the cold sweat running down my back as I turned to face my captor. The figure was cloaked in darkness, their features obscured by shadows. I could make out a faint glint of something metallic in their hand. A knife? "Let go of me!" I shouted, my voice trembling but fierce. I twisted my arm, trying to break free, but their grip only tightened. "Help! Someone help!" The laughter echoed around me, chilling my bones. Scream all you want. No one can hear you now. In a burst of adrenaline, I kicked out, my foot connecting with their knee. The figure stumbled back, momentarily releasing me. I took the opportunity to run, but my heart sank as I realized I was in a narrow alley, my escape options limited. Get her, the voice shouted again, and I could hear their footsteps pounding behind me, relentless and predatory. I sprinted deeper into the alley, glancing back to see shadows closing in. The adrenaline coursed through my veins, fueling my flight as I pushed myself harder, desperation driving me forward. The night air felt thick and suffocating, each breath a reminder of the danger I faced. As I reached the end of the alley, I spotted a dumpster and ducked behind it, pressing my back against the cold metal. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to quiet my breathing, willing myself to blend into the shadows. I could hear them drawing closer, their laughter echoing in the narrow space. Where are you hiding? We just want to play. The laughter sent shivers down my spine, but I steeled myself, refusing to be a victim. I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but I remembered it had fallen from my pocket during my escape. Panic surged again, but I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. The footsteps stopped, and I heard the sounds of them whispering to one another, their voices a chilling mixture of excitement and malice. She can't have gone far. Check the other side of the dumpster. I glanced around, searching for an escape route. The alley opened up into a small courtyard behind an old, dilapidated building. There were a few vehicles parked along the far side, and I knew I had to make a move soon. You can't hide forever, one of them taunted, their voice dripping with mockery. We'll find you, and then the real fun begins. Taking a deep breath, I prepared myself for the next move. The moment the shadows shifted, I darted from behind the dumpster, sprinting toward the courtyard. I could hear them shrieking in surprise, their footsteps echoing behind me as I bolted for the nearest car. As I reached the vehicle, I quickly glanced back to see the dark figures racing toward me, their intentions clear. I lunged for the passenger side door and yanked it open, desperate to find a way inside. To my relief, it was unlocked. I dove in and slammed the door shut, locking it just as I heard them reach the car. Get her! She's in there, one shouted, and I could see their silhouettes pressing against the windows, their faces contorted with rage. My heart raced as I scrambled to find the keys. They weren't in the ignition. I fumbled through the glove compartment, panic rising as the footsteps thudded against the metal. They were trying to get in, and I knew I didn't have much time. Open the door, they shouted, pounding against the window. You can't hide forever. You'll regret this. Just as I thought I was out of options, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out, and to my relief, it was a spare key fob. I pressed the unlock button frantically, but nothing happened. Hurry up, we're coming in, the voice yelled, and I felt a rush of despair. I pressed the button again, my hands shaking as I fought to remain calm. Suddenly, the locks clicked and the doors unlocked. My heart leapt as I turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life, echoing in the cramped space. The figures outside paused, their eyes widening in surprise. What the? Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the tires screeching as I jerked the car forward. The sudden motion caught them off guard, and I veered around them, narrowly missing the outstretched hands trying to grab me. As I sped away from the scene, my heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I glanced back through the rearview mirror, the figures becoming smaller in the distance. I couldn't believe I had escaped, but I knew this wasn't over. I needed to get to the police to make sure they understood the danger that was still out there. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I navigated through the quiet streets, the rush of adrenaline beginning to fade. My mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened, but I pushed those aside as I approached the nearest police station. Pulling into the parking lot, I felt a rush of relief. As I stepped out of the car, I could see the lights flickering inside the building. I rushed to the entrance, bursting through the door. The officer at the front desk looked up, surprise etched on his face. Help! You have to help me. I was attacked. I gasped, breathless and trembling. Calm down, miss. What happened? He asked, his tone firm yet reassuring. I could see the concern in his eyes as I recounted everything that had happened. The phone call, the shadows, the chase. I watched as his expression shifted from confusion to alarm, and he immediately reached for the radio, calling for backup. "We'll get a team out there right away," he assured me. "Can you give me a description of your attackers?" Just as I was about to respond, a cold wave of dread washed over me. The door to the station swung open, and my heart sank as I saw the familiar silhouettes of my attackers standing outside, their faces shrouded in darkness. "They found me," I whispered, fear gripping my heart once more. "Stay behind me," the officer said, positioning himself protectively in front of me. The atmosphere in the police station shifted instantly from one of safety to one of impending dread. I felt a chill run down my spine as the shadows of my pursuers loomed closer. Their menacing figures framed by the harsh light outside created a scene straight from a nightmare. "Stay back," the officer shouted, reaching for his firearm. His voice was steady, but I could sense the tension in his body. He knew as well as I did that we were in imminent danger. "You think you can protect her?" one of the figures taunted, a cruel smirk creeping across his face. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart racing as the adrenaline surged anew. It felt surreal, like I was caught in a horror movie. The officer stood firm, his determination palpable. "Get inside. Lock the doors," he yelled to the station staff, his voice echoing through the open space. Panic flared in the room as people rushed to secure themselves. I caught a glimpse of the officer's radio. "Backup is on the way," he assured me, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The sound of footsteps grew louder, their presence a dark cloud threatening to engulf us all. "Let her go," the lead figure sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "We just want to have a little chat." "You have a funny way of asking," the officer shot back, his finger hovering over the trigger. I could feel the tension in the air as the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. I was acutely aware of every sound. The creaking of the floor, the distant wail of sirens approaching, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "You think you can just hide behind those walls?" Another figure laughed, moving to block the entrance. "We can get in, and when we do, no one will be left standing." A sudden wave of fear washed over me, and I remembered the hidden camera, the sense of being watched. I realized then that this wasn't just a random attack. It was personal. They had planned this, and I was their target. "Enough of this," the officer shouted, finally taking control of the situation. "I'm giving you one last chance to leave. If you don't, I will use force." The lead figure stepped forward, his expression twisted with rage. "You really think you can stop us?" In that moment, I saw my opportunity. The officer's attention was on them, and I quickly reached for the phone on the desk behind me. I dialed 911, my hands shaking as I whispered my location. "Please hurry," I breathed into the phone, glancing at the officer who was still focused on the intruders. "This isn't a game. You're in way over your head," the figure spat. "Leave now, or I swear I will make you regret it," the officer warned again, standing tall. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the station plunged into darkness. Gasps erupted from the staff, and I felt panic grip me once more. The backup power kicked in, but the shadows of the figures moved like phantoms in the dim light. "They're inside," someone shouted, and chaos erupted as people scrambled to find safety. The officer remained resolute, his gun drawn and aimed at the nearest shadow. "Everyone stay down. Get to safety." But just as he called for calm, the figures surged forward, their laughter echoing in the cramped space. The lead figure lunged at the officer, but he sidestepped, firing a warning shot into the air. "This is your last chance," the officer yelled, but his words were drowned out by the chaos. I held my breath, the tension in the room thickening as I watched the confrontation unfold. Suddenly, the sound of sirens grew louder, piercing through the madness. The cavalry was coming, but would they make it in time? The lead figure pulled out a knife, glinting ominously in the flickering light. "You're going to regret this, officer," he sneered. In a split second, the officer tackled the man, and the two of them crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. My heart raced as I watched, feeling completely helpless. "Get the others," the officer shouted, trying to subdue his attacker. But more figures joined the fray, and chaos erupted. I knew I had to act. I darted toward the door, slipping past the scuffle, my heart racing as I searched for an escape. Just then, I heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens pulling up outside. "Police! Get down!" the officers shouted as they rushed into the building, guns drawn. "Out of the way!" one of them yelled, and I felt a surge of hope. The moment I stepped outside, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I turned back to see the chaos unfolding inside. The officers were moving in, their voices commanding, demanding compliance. I could hear the struggle, the sound of scuffling feet and shouts. The shadows seemed to recoil at the arrival of the police, their confidence wavering as they tried to regroup. I took a step back, my heart pounding, watching as the scene unfolded like a gripping movie. The lead figure was finally subdued, his knife clattering to the ground. The other officers rushed in, quickly apprehending the remaining figures. I stood frozen, relief flooding through me as I watched the chaos transform into order. "Are you all right?" an officer asked, rushing to my side. I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "I think so. I called 911. "You did good," he reassured me, guiding me to safety away from the chaos. "We got this now." As I watched the remaining figures being taken into custody, the weight of the night began to lift. I was safe, but I knew that the scars from this experience would linger far longer than the events of the evening. I was thankful to be alive, yet the fear of being watched, hunted, and stalked would haunt me for years to come. I glanced around, taking in the faces of the officers, the sight of the captured figures, and the flickering lights of the police cars surrounding the station. I had faced something terrifying, but I had emerged from it alive. The ordeal had changed me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend, but as the sirens faded into the distance, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had survived, and perhaps that was the most empowering thing of all. The aftermath of the chaos settled around me like a heavy fog, the adrenaline that had fueled my fight-or-flight response slowly dissipating. I stood outside the police station, my legs trembling as I took deep, calming breaths. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. As the night deepened, the comforting lights of the police cars created a surreal glow against the darkened sky. Officers were busy managing the situation, but I felt like a bystander in my own life, watching it unfold from a distance. My heart still raced, a constant reminder of the terror I had just escaped. "Are you okay?" The officer from earlier approached me again, his expression softening with concern. I think so," I managed to reply, my voice shaky. "I just need a moment." "Take your time," he said, nodding empathetically. "You've been through a lot. We're going to ensure you're safe, and we'll need your statement later." I appreciated his kindness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed within me. The fear that had gripped me throughout the ordeal was now mingling with an odd sense of empowerment. I had faced a nightmare and had come out the other side. The sounds of the police radios crackling, the rustling of uniforms, and the distant sirens created an almost soothing rhythm. It reminded me that I was no longer alone. I had been protected, and those who had once threatened my safety were now behind bars. I watched as they led the captured figures away in handcuffs, their faces twisted in anger and defeat. There was a sense of justice in seeing them restrained, but I also felt a pang of fear. How had they come so close to infiltrating my life? "I need to get my things," I said, breaking my silence and addressing the officer again. "What do you mean?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "My phone, my bag. They were inside the station when everything happened. Let me get someone to retrieve those for you," he suggested, turning to call over another officer. I appreciated the promptness, though I felt a bit hesitant to re-enter the station. The very thought of going back inside felt suffocating. While I waited, my mind raced with thoughts of how I would move forward from this experience. I had no idea how long it would take for the fear to dissipate. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, uncertainty, and dread. I longed for normalcy, but knew that the shadows of that night would linger. "Here's your bag," the officer returned, handing me my belongings. "And your phone?" "Thank you," I said, taking a moment to collect myself. Holding the familiar items felt grounding, as if they could somehow tether me back to my reality. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked, looking at me with genuine concern. "I can go home," I replied, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. My home had been a sanctuary, but now it felt like a reminder of everything I had endured. "I recommend finding someone to stay with tonight," he advised. "You shouldn't be alone right now." His words struck a chord. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to feel safe, to know that I wasn't being watched anymore. "I'll call a friend," I said, pulling out my phone to make the call. As I dialed, I noticed the officer standing nearby, watching over me like a protective guardian. I took a deep breath, ready to reach out for support. "Hey, it's me," I said when my friend picked up. "I need your help." "What happened? Are you okay?" she responded, her voice filled with concern. "I'm okay now, but I need a place to stay for the night," I explained, the emotions spilling out as I spoke. "Of course. Come over right now. I'll be waiting," she assured me. "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. After hanging up, I turned to the officer again. "I'm going to my friend's place. I'll be okay." "That's a good choice," he said. "If you need anything else, don't hesitate to call." With a final nod, I stepped away from the station, the cool night air hitting my face like a refreshing wave. I took one last glance back, feeling a mix of gratitude and sorrow. That building had been a fortress of safety, but it had also become a battleground. As I made my way to my car, I couldn't help but reflect on the events of the night. I had confronted my fears, faced down my tormentors, and walked away unbroken. The drive to my friend's house was filled with silence, save for the comforting hum of the engine. The darkness outside felt different now, less ominous, more freeing. I could finally breathe without the weight of fear pressing down on me. Arriving at my friend's home, I was greeted by her warm embrace. "I'm so glad you're okay," she said, leading me inside. "Me too," I replied, the comfort of her presence calming my frayed nerves. As the night wore on, we talked, laughed, and slowly began to peel away the layers of fear that had enveloped me. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone. I had people who cared and were willing to stand by me. In the days that followed, I took small steps toward reclaiming my life. I reported everything to the authorities, ensured that measures were put in place to protect myself, and found solace in the support of friends and family. Though the memories of that night would linger, I also found strength in them. I had survived, and in doing so, I learned to navigate the darkness with a newfound resilience. Perhaps I would never completely forget the terror of being watched, but I had also discovered the power of community, support, and the determination to live life on my terms. I was ready to embrace a new beginning, one where I would no longer be a victim, but a survivor, someone who had faced fear head-on and emerged victorious. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. It all began on a seemingly ordinary night, the kind that lulls you into a false sense of security. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and a soft breeze played with the curtains of my bedroom window. I had just settled into bed, the comforting weight of my quilt enveloping me, when the first hint of something amiss slid into my awareness. As I turned off my bedside lamp, the room was cast in shadow, but the glow from the streetlight outside seeped through the thin fabric of the curtains. I always found solace in the gentle rhythm of the night, the comforting sounds of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves. But tonight was different. There was an unsettling stillness that cloaked my surroundings, as if the world outside had paused in anticipation. With the quiet came an inexplicable feeling of being observed. It started as an inkling, a tickle at the back of my mind that I was not alone. I dismissed it, attributing it to my overactive imagination. After all, I had spent the last few weeks alone in the house while my roommate was away on vacation. It wasn't unusual for the quiet to feel oppressive when you were by yourself. But the feeling grew stronger, more insistent, gnawing at my resolve. I glanced towards the window, half expecting to see nothing but the darkened street outside. Instead, my heart skipped a beat. There, just beyond the glass, was a figure, tall, still, and cloaked in darkness. The sight sent a chill spiraling down my spine. I blinked, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But there it was, unmistakably real. a man standing motionless just outside my window. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel his gaze piercing through the darkness, fixing on me with a sense of unwavering intensity. Panic surged through me as I pulled the covers tighter around my body, my breath quickening. I wanted to look away, to convince myself it was a figment of my imagination, but something held my gaze. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of the moment. The idea that someone could be standing so close, so still, as if he were waiting for something. I couldn't make out any features, but there was a starkness to his presence that felt eerily deliberate. He seemed to blend into the night, the outlines of his form indistinguishable from the shadows. Every instinct screamed for me to get up, to close the curtains, to shut him out of my world. Yet, a morbid curiosity rooted me to my bed. The minutes ticked by, each second stretching into an eternity. I strained to listen for any sound, any sign that he was more than just a figment of my fears. The silence outside felt thick, almost suffocating. It was as if the entire neighborhood held its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. And then, just as abruptly as he had appeared, he shifted slightly. My heart raced as I watched him lean closer to the window, his movements slow and deliberate. A surge of adrenaline kicked in, propelling me from my bed. I had to know if he was real or if I was losing my mind. As I crept toward the window, I felt a mix of dread and fascination. My hand trembled as I reached for the curtain, pulling it aside just enough to peek outside. But the street was empty. The man was gone. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by an unease I couldn't shake. Had he been there at all? Or had my imagination conjured him from the depths of my solitude? I tried to rationalize it, blaming the isolation of the past few weeks for my heightened anxiety. As I climbed back into bed, I knew sleep would evade me. The unsettling thought lingered. Who was the man standing outside my window? What did he want? And would he return? The next day passed in a blur of mundane activities, but the memory of the man outside my window loomed over me like a dark cloud. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light or a fleeting shadow. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. I spent the day obsessively checking my windows and doors, making sure everything was locked and secured. I felt foolish, but the fear was real. The sun set earlier than I expected, and as evening approached, the shadows deepened, wrapping around my home like a thick, suffocating blanket. I settled into my routine, trying to distract myself with a movie and a bowl of popcorn. The familiar flicker of the screen provided some comfort, but every creak of the house made me jump. I kept glancing towards the window, half expecting to see that tall figure standing outside again. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I finally decided to turn off the movie and go to bed. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my stomach. I climbed under the covers, trying to find comfort in their warmth. But sleep was elusive, slipping through my fingers like sand. Hours ticked by, and I finally closed my eyes, willing myself to drift off. Just as I began to relax, I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My heart raced as I listened, straining to discern whether I was imagining things again. But there it was, a faint tapping against the window, rhythmic and persistent. With every thud, I felt the blood drain from my face. I held my breath, frozen in place as I forced myself to confront my fears. I couldn't just lie there. I had to know. I slowly swung my legs over the side of the bed, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run, to hide. But I couldn't. I needed to face whatever was happening. I tiptoed towards the window, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The tapping continued, each sound echoing in the silence like a death knell. With trembling hands, I reached for the curtain, pulling it back just enough to peer outside. My heart dropped. There he was again, the man, standing just beyond the glass, as still as before. But this time, his face was partially illuminated by the flickering streetlight. I could make out his features. Unkempt hair that hung over his forehead and a pale, gaunt face that seemed almost otherworldly. His eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed intently on me. I stumbled back, a surge of panic flooding my senses. "What do you want?" I gasped, the words escaping my lips before I could stop myself. He didn't answer. He merely continued to stare, his expression unreadable. A chilling realization swept over me. He had come back. There was no mistaking the intent behind his gaze. It was as if he was waiting for something, and I had unwittingly become part of whatever twisted game he was playing. Desperate to escape, I fumbled for my phone, but my hands were shaking so violently that I could barely unlock the screen. I called 911, my voice trembling as I reported a suspicious person outside my house. I glanced back towards the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The man was gone. Panic surged through me. Had he heard my call? Did he know I was onto him? I rushed to the door, locking it tightly before retreating to the living room. I felt like a trapped animal, my instincts screaming for me to hide. Just then, I heard a faint sound, the unmistakable scrape of a shoe against the wood floor above me. My blood ran cold. He was inside. I had to make a choice. I could stay hidden and wait for the police, or I could confront this unknown threat myself. Before I could think, my legs carried me to the basement door. It was a dark, cramped space that I usually avoided, but it felt like my only chance. If I could get there unnoticed, I might find a place to hide until help arrived. I slipped through the door, shutting it softly behind me, praying that the darkness would conceal me. As I crouched in the shadows, I could hear the sounds above me, the creaking of floorboards, the faint rustle of movement. My heart raced as I tried to quiet my breath. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the scent of mildew. My heart raced as I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall, straining to hear anything above the muffled sounds of movement. Each creak of the floorboards above me sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through my veins. I reached for my phone, the dim light illuminating the cramped space around me. My fingers shook as I fumbled with the screen, but the call to 911 was still active. I could hear the operator's voice on the other end, but I was too terrified to speak. The sound of my heart pounding in my ears drowned out all rational thought. Just then, I heard it, a soft thud followed by silence. The house above me seemed to hold its breath, and I instinctively pressed myself deeper into the shadows, hoping against hope that I had escaped detection. "Hello," the operator said, her voice breaking through the tension. "Are you still there? Can you tell me your location?" I opened my mouth to respond, but all that came out was a whimper. I closed my eyes, focusing on controlling my breathing. I had to speak. I had to let her know I was in danger. "Please, I'm in my basement," I finally managed to whisper. "Someone is in my house. Stay quiet and listen to me," she instructed, her voice firm yet calm. "Help is on the way. Can you lock the door to your basement?" I glanced at the door, the flimsy wooden frame seeming utterly inadequate against whatever threat lurked above. "I already did," I whispered. "Good. Now, I want you to find a place to hide. Can you do that?" I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see me. "Yes." I shifted quietly away from the wall, moving toward a cluster of old boxes in the corner of the basement. They were stacked haphazardly, but I hoped they would provide some cover. As I crouched behind them, the weight of dread pressed down on me. I could hear muffled sounds coming from above, the faint shuffle of footsteps, the rustling of fabric. The seconds turned into minutes, each one stretching out like an eternity. I clenched my phone tightly in my hand, listening for any sign that the intruder was getting closer. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, causing me to jump. My heart raced as I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that he hadn't heard me. A moment later, I heard a voice, low and chilling, echoing through the house. "Where are you?" it called, a twisted mockery of concern. "You can't hide from me." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It was him. He knew I was there. My breath quickened, and I fought the urge to scream. "Stay quiet," the operator urged. "I need you to remain calm. Help is almost there." But how could I stay calm? The voice above me sent shivers down my spine, and I could hear the soft tread of footsteps as he moved through the house. Each step felt like a countdown, leading to a confrontation I wasn't prepared for. "Are you in the basement?" he called again, the taunting lilt in his voice making my stomach churn. "I can smell your fear." A surge of anger rose within me, fueling my courage. I wasn't going to be his prey. I had to outsmart him, to stay one step ahead. I glanced at the old tools hanging on the wall nearby. If I could find something to defend myself, maybe I could face him. With painstaking care, I crawled toward the wall, inching closer to the tools. Just as I reached out for a rusty wrench, the basement door swung open with a creak, flooding the room with light. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the space. My breath hitched, and I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would give me away. The light silhouetted his form as he stepped into the basement, his expression twisted with malice. Come out, wherever you are," he taunted, a sinister smile stretching across his face. I clutched the wrench tightly, my knuckles turning white. The operator's voice crackled through my phone, but I couldn't focus on her words. It was just him and me now. The intruder took a step closer, scanning the shadows. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. Suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. His smile faltered, and he glanced toward the stairs. "Looks like your friends are here," he sneered. "But I can't let you go that easily." Adrenaline surged through me, and I took a deep breath, ready to fight for my life. "Stay where you are," I shouted, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. He paused, his gaze snapping back to me. "You think you can scare me?" But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had to act. The tension in the air crackled like static electricity as I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest. The intruder's twisted grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed to glint in the dim light. "You really think you can stop me?" he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. "I'm not afraid of you," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I tightened my grip on the wrench, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. "You won't get away with this." He chuckled, a low, sinister sound that echoed in the confined space of the basement. "You're just a scared little girl hiding in the dark. What do you think you can do with that?" He pointed at the wrench dismissively, as if it were a toy. Before I could respond, he lunged at me, moving with surprising speed. Instinct kicked in, and I swung the wrench with all my might. The metal connected with his arm, a satisfying thud that sent a shockwave of adrenaline coursing through me. "Ah," he hissed, stumbling back, but he quickly regained his composure. His expression morphed from amusement to rage, and I could see the fury burning in his eyes. "You're going to regret that." I took a step back, heart racing as I tried to create some distance. The sirens outside were getting louder, but I knew I couldn't rely on them just yet. I had to hold him off until help arrived. "Stay away from me," I shouted, swinging the wrench again as he lunged forward. This time, he ducked just in time, and the tool whistled through the air, missing him by inches. He grinned, a dangerous glint in his eye. "You're not as clever as you think." "You're wrong," I shot back, my fear morphing into anger. "I know exactly who you are, and I'm not going to let you hurt me." His laughter echoed off the walls, a sound filled with derision. "You think you know me? You don't know anything." He stepped forward again, but I was ready this time. I swung the wrench once more, aiming for his legs. The wrench connected with a sickening crack, and he howled in pain, dropping to one knee. "You'll pay for that," he screamed, his face twisted in agony and rage. I seized the opportunity, darting to the side to put some distance between us. I glanced back at the door, desperate to see if help was on the way. The sirens were closer now, their wails echoing through the house. The intruder stood up again, clutching his injured leg. "You think the cops can save you? They won't be able to protect you from me." I could hear the sound of footsteps approaching the front door above us. "It's over," I said defiantly. "You're not going to get away with this." He took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Just then, the basement door burst open, and 2 police officers rushed in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Hands up! Show us your hands!" one of them shouted. The intruder froze, caught off guard. "No!" he screamed, looking between the officers and me. "This isn't over." Before he could make a move, the officers tackled him to the ground, quickly cuffing his wrists behind his back. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering, and for threatening this young woman," one of them said, pinning him down. I watched, breathless, as they secured him. The weight of fear lifted slightly from my shoulders, but I remained on high alert, ready for anything. "Are you okay?" one of the officers asked me, his voice low and reassuring. "I think so," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. I need to get out of here." He nodded, glancing back at his partner as they helped the intruder to his feet. "We're going to take him in. Can you tell us what happened?" I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. "I thought I was going to die," I said, my voice shaking. "He's been watching me for weeks." As I recounted the events, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving me feeling shaky and exhausted. The officers listened intently, their expressions serious as they took notes and asked questions. "Thank you for your help," I said finally, my voice hoarse. They assured me that I was safe now, but I knew it would take time to feel secure in my own home again. As they escorted the intruder out of the basement, I caught one last glimpse of his face, twisted in rage, eyes burning with hatred. "You'll regret this," he shouted as they led him away. But I stood firm, my resolve hardening. This was my home, my life, and I wouldn't let fear control me any longer. With the police securing the scene, I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the evening slowly lift from my shoulders. I was safe for now. In the days that followed the harrowing encounter, a fog of disbelief settled over me. I had expected relief once the intruder was arrested, yet a lingering sense of dread clung to my every thought. The police assured me that they had evidence to keep him locked away, but it did little to calm my racing heart. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of leaves outside felt amplified, turning my once peaceful home into a trap of anxiety. I found myself double-checking the locks on every door and window before bed, a ritual that now felt more necessary than ever. At work, my co-workers noticed my distracted demeanor. I forced smiles and small talk, but deep down, I was still processing the trauma. My mind often drifted back to that night, his twisted grin, the feeling of powerlessness. But it was in the quiet moments, when I was alone, that my fears became unbearable. One night, as I sat curled up on the couch, watching a mindless show in a desperate attempt to escape my thoughts, I heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps outside. My heart raced as I instinctively glanced at the window, half expecting to see the same dark figure. Nothing, just the shadows playing tricks under the dim streetlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the unease lingered. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, bound by fear. So, the next day, I made a decision. I would face my fear head on. I called a friend, Sarah, who had always been my rock. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Of course." "Want to come over?" she offered. I hesitated, knowing how this conversation would unfold. "Actually, can we meet at the park? I need to be outside." "Sure, I'll be there in half an hour." The park was vibrant with life as I walked through the green pathways, the sun filtering through the trees, but the color seemed muted compared to my swirling thoughts. When Sarah arrived, she greeted me with a warm hug, sensing the heaviness hanging over me. "Tell me everything," she urged as we settled on a bench. I recounted the events, the horror of that night, the feeling of being hunted. As I spoke, a mix of fear and catharsis washed over me. I thought I could move on, but it's like I'm stuck in that moment. Sarah listened intently, her expression turning grave. "It's completely normal to feel this way, especially after what you've been through. Have you considered talking to someone? A therapist?" I nodded slowly. "I think I might need to, but it feels so daunting." She reached out, squeezing my hand. "You're stronger than you think. Facing it is the first step. You don't have to go through this alone." Her words resonated deep within me. I had spent too long letting fear dictate my life, and it was time to take control. With Sarah's support, I decided to seek professional help. The following weeks brought a blend of therapy sessions, quiet reflections, and moments of courage. I learned about grounding techniques, practiced breathing exercises, and slowly opened up about my trauma. The therapist encouraged me to reclaim my space, to remember that my home was my sanctuary, not a prison. One evening, after a long day of work, I returned home, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. It was time to confront my fears. I opened every curtain, allowing the sunlight to pour in. I moved the furniture around, rearranging the living room to create a new atmosphere. I even invited Sarah over for a movie night, determined to reclaim my sense of normalcy. As we settled in, laughter echoed through the living room, a sound I hadn't heard in ages. It felt good to relax and share silly moments, the weight of my past slowly lifting. But just as I began to let my guard down, I heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps outside. I froze, my heart pounding as I glanced toward the window. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sarah's smile faded, her expression shifting to concern. "What do you mean?" "There's someone outside," I said, rising from the couch to peer through the blinds. "Let me check," she said, standing up as well. We approached the window together, the tension palpable in the air. But when we looked out, there was nothing, just the stillness of the night and the shadows dancing in the wind. "See? It's just your imagination," Sarah reassured me, trying to lighten the mood. I nodded but couldn't shake the unease. "Maybe," I said, forcing a smile. I don't want to feel this way anymore." "Let's keep doing this," Sarah suggested, her voice firm. "Every week. Movie nights, dinners, whatever it takes to remind you that you're safe." I felt a swell of gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it." The following weeks became a routine of laughter, comfort, and slowly rebuilding my life. Each day felt a little brighter, and I learned to reclaim my power bit by bit. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows lurking in the corners of my mind were still there, waiting for a moment of weakness. Then came the day when I discovered a small, wrapped package on my doorstep. My heart raced as I picked it up, feeling the weight of dread settle in my stomach. "Sarah," I called, my voice trembling. She rushed to the door, her face a mask of concern. "What is it?" I held the package in my trembling hands, a sense of foreboding washing over me. "I don't know who it's from." As we carefully opened the package together, a chill ran down my spine. Inside lay a simple note. "I'm still watching." The note hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating my newfound sense of safety. "What does this mean?" I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I read the words again, feeling the weight of dread settle deep within me. "Maybe it's just a prank," Sarah suggested, but her voice trembled slightly, betraying her own unease. "This isn't just a prank. After everything I went through, this feels personal." I held the note in front of me, my hands shaking. The neat handwriting felt familiar, yet chilling, as if it belonged to someone I once knew. "We need to call the police," Sarah urged, her eyes wide with concern. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Yes, we should." As I dialed the number, a flood of emotions surged through me. Fear, anger, and a sense of helplessness. When the operator answered, I felt the tremor in my voice. I need to report a threatening note I just received." The dispatcher listened carefully as I recounted the recent events and the chilling message. "We'll send an officer to your location," she assured me. "Stay calm and don't confront anyone." After hanging up, I turned to Sarah, my breath hitching. "What if it's him? What if he's out there, watching us right now?" "Let's not jump to conclusions," Sarah said, trying to calm me. "We need to stay inside and wait for the police." We paced around the living room, my mind racing with possibilities. Every sound outside felt amplified. Cars driving by, leaves rustling, and distant laughter. Each noise made me flinch, as if it could be the sign of someone lurking just out of sight. I felt trapped in my own home, the very sanctuary I had fought to reclaim now feeling like a prison. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, there was a knock on the door. My heart raced as I glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "It's the police," she whispered. I opened the door, revealing 2 officers standing there, their expressions serious yet compassionate. "We received a call about a threatening note," one of them said, his voice calm but firm. "Yes," I replied, leading them inside. I handed over the note, my hands trembling. "I don't know who sent it, but it feels like someone is watching me again." The officer examined the note closely. "Have you noticed anything unusual around your home? Any unfamiliar cars parked nearby, or strange behavior from neighbors?" I shook my head. "No, nothing until now. I thought I was safe." The other officer spoke up. "We recommend increasing your home security, cameras, better locks, and being aware of your surroundings. We'll also patrol your area more frequently for the time being." As they gathered information, I felt a flicker of anger rising within me. This isn't right. I shouldn't have to live like this. I shouldn't be looking over my shoulder every moment. The officers exchanged glances, and one said, "We understand how distressing this is. You've been through a lot, and it's normal to feel anxious. We'll do everything we can to help." After they left, I sank into the couch, feeling the weight of the world crash down on me. Sarah sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my back. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together," she reassured me. But inside, I felt the walls closing in. The fear that had ebbed was now swelling, threatening to consume me once more. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was returning, stalking me with each passing day. The following weeks were a blur of unease. I followed Sarah's advice and took precautions, installing security cameras, locking every door, and avoiding walking alone at night. Despite my efforts, a constant knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. I found myself researching more about the man who had previously tormented me, looking for clues that might lead me to understand his motives. As I scrolled through news articles and police reports, I stumbled upon something chilling: details about his past, the lives he had ruined, and the chilling pattern of his behavior. But there was one particular detail that made my blood run cold. The man had once lived in my neighborhood. Feeling sick to my stomach, I sat back in my chair, the implications washing over me. What if he's still here? I murmured to myself. What if he's been waiting for the right moment to strike again? Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind sent me spiraling into panic. I avoided looking out the windows, fearing I might catch a glimpse of him lurking just beyond the glass. Each day felt heavier than the last, my mind becoming a battleground of fear and paranoia. Then, one night, while scrolling through my phone, I received a notification, a social media friend request from someone I didn't recognize. The profile picture was blurry, the name unfamiliar. A chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the accept button. Something about it felt wrong. I decided to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it might be more than just a random request. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the shadows seemed to whisper to me, and the darkness felt alive. Sleep eluded me, my thoughts a whirlwind of paranoia. In a desperate attempt to feel safe, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight feature, illuminating my room. I scanned the corners, checking for any signs of intrusion. Everything appeared normal, but my mind wouldn't settle. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise, a tapping sound coming from my window. My heart raced as I turned to face it, the beam of light illuminating the glass. There, in the shadows, stood a figure just outside my window. I blinked, my breath hitching in my throat. I froze, the light from my phone shaking in my hand. The figure outside the window remained still, a dark silhouette against the pale glow of the moon. My heart pounded loudly in my chest, each beat echoing in the silence that surrounded me. It felt like time had come to a standstill, and in that frozen moment, I was paralyzed by a rush of terror and disbelief. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking as I struggled to project strength. The figure didn't move or respond. It simply stood there, looming in the darkness. A feeling of dread washed over me, a suffocating blanket of fear that threatened to pull me under. I scrambled backward, my mind racing as I debated my next move. Should I call for help? Should I confront this stranger? I quickly opted for the safer route and reached for my phone, ready to call the police. Just as I was about to dial, the figure took a step closer, and I caught a glimpse of something, a glint of metal in its hand. Panic surged through me. "Stay away," I yelled, pressing my back against the wall, desperately searching for an escape route. The figure stopped again, its head tilting slightly as if assessing me. In the dim light, I could make out the contours of a face, dark eyes watching me intently. I was certain I recognized that gaze. It felt hauntingly familiar. My heart sank as the realization hit me. This was him, the man who had stalked me for weeks, the shadow who haunted my nightmares. In a blind rush of adrenaline, I dashed to my bedroom door, flinging it open and running into the hallway. My mind screamed at me to get out, to find safety, but my feet felt heavy, as if the darkness was trying to hold me back. I sprinted down the stairs, each step echoing in the quiet house. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me, the chilling reminder that I was not alone. I burst into the living room and fumbled for the front door, yanking it open and stumbling outside into the cool night air. The street was dimly lit, shadows cast by the flickering street lamps. I glanced back, and my stomach twisted as I saw the figure stepping out of the shadows, following me. "Help! Somebody!" I screamed, my voice piercing the silence. But the streets were deserted, and my cries seemed to vanish into the night. I took off down the driveway, fear propelling me forward as I darted into the darkness. As I ran, I felt the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but doubt began to creep in. Where was I going? How far could I run? I was on the verge of panic when I spotted my neighbor's house across the street, the lights still glowing warmly inside. It was my only hope. I sprinted toward the door, slamming my fist against it. "Please, open up," I shouted, fear and desperation fueling my plea. Moments felt like hours as I waited, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Just when I thought no one would answer, the door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman with kind eyes. "What on earth?" she began, but I pushed past her, urgency spilling out in my frantic explanation. "There's someone outside. I need help." Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted from confusion to concern as she quickly closed the door behind me. "Stay here," she said firmly, moving toward the window. I felt a surge of gratitude wash over me as I stood there, panting and shaking, my eyes darting to the door. "He's out there. He's been watching me. Let's see what we're dealing with," Mrs. Thompson said, peering out through the curtains. I followed her, my heart racing as I stole a glance outside. The street was empty now, the figure seemingly vanished into the shadows. I felt a wave of confusion crash over me. Had I imagined it? Had I allowed my fear to create a monster that wasn't there? Mrs. Thompson turned to me, concern etched on her face. "Are you sure? It could just be a passerby." I shook my head vigorously, the memory of those dark eyes burned into my mind. "No, it was him. I know it was him." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed outside, and my blood ran cold. Mrs. Thompson stiffened, and we both moved away from the window, retreating into the living room. "What do we do?" I whispered, fear constricting my throat. "We need to call the police again," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. As she dialed, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. What if he had come to finish what he had started? What if this time he succeeded? I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. After what felt like an eternity, the police arrived, their lights flashing brightly outside. I felt a rush of relief mingled with fear as I watched them approach Mrs. Thompson's house. She opened the door to let them in, and I could see the concerned expressions on their faces as they assessed the situation. I recounted everything that had happened, my voice trembling with fear and frustration. The officers listened carefully, jotting down notes and exchanging worried glances. "We'll patrol the area," one of them said, his voice reassuring. "And we'll do a sweep of your neighborhood tonight. Just stay here and keep the doors locked." I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and helplessness. As they left, I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. Mrs. Thompson turned to me, her expression softening. "You're safe here for now. Just try to relax." I sat on the couch, feeling utterly drained. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "You're stronger than you think," she said gently, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "But we need to stay vigilant. If he's still out there, we can't let him catch us off guard." I nodded, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. As the hours passed, I felt the adrenaline begin to fade, leaving behind an emptiness that was hard to ignore. The fear lingered, haunting the corners of my mind, but I refused to let it control me. I had come too far to let that happen. The following days were a blur of anxiety. I stayed at Mrs. Thompson's as much as I could, feeling safer with her presence. We spent evenings sharing stories, keeping the darkness at bay. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't hide forever. Each time I looked out the window, I half expected to see that figure lurking in the shadows. Each creak of the floorboard sent my heart racing. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I clung to hope. One afternoon, while I was sorting through my belongings, I stumbled upon an old box filled with photographs and letters from my past. As I flipped through the memories, I found a picture that stopped me cold. It was a group photo from high school, my friends and me, all smiling and carefree. But what caught my attention was the familiar face standing among us. My heart raced as I stared at the image, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. That face belonged to someone I hadn't thought about in years, someone who had been close to me before everything changed. Could it be possible that this person had returned to haunt me? Was the man watching me somehow connected to my past? With a new sense of urgency, I decided to reach out to an old friend. I had to uncover the truth behind my past, hoping it would help me understand what was happening in my present. But as I dialed the number, a sense of foreboding settled over me. I knew that I was about to uncover secrets I had long buried, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I might find. The phone rang, each tone echoing my rising anxiety. I paced the room, glancing at the window every few seconds, half expecting to see the figure lurking outside. When the line finally connected, I took a deep breath and steeled myself for the conversation. "Hello," a familiar voice answered, laced with surprise. It was Alex, a close friend from high school. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the incident that shattered our circle. "Alex, it's me." "It's been a long time," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty in my stomach. "Oh wow, hey. It has been a while. How are you?" he asked, his tone cheerful, but I could sense the underlying concern. I'm okay, I guess," I replied, biting my lip. "Actually, I need to talk to you about something serious. It's about something that happened back then." I could hear the shift in his tone, the weight of the past settling heavily between us. "Is this about what happened to Jenna?" he asked cautiously. Jenna had been our friend who had gone missing the summer after graduation, leaving us all reeling with grief and confusion. "Yes," I admitted, the weight of her memory pressing down on me. "There's something happening now. I feel like I'm being watched, and I think it might have something to do with her disappearance." Silence hung heavily on the line, thick and suffocating. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've been seeing this man outside my house. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but I know he's real. I've seen him every night, standing there, watching me. And I think he's connected to Jenna." "I remember how close you were to her," Alex said, his voice low. "Didn't she have an ex-boyfriend who was a bit off?" My mind raced back to the details I had tried to forget. "Yes, Kyle. He was possessive, always lurking around. We thought he was a bit obsessive, but we didn't think he would hurt her. After she disappeared, he just vanished too. Do you think?" "I don't know," Alex replied, his voice grim. "But if you're being watched, you need to be careful." "Have you told the police?" "Yes, but they didn't take it seriously," I confessed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "They think I'm overreacting, but I can't shake the feeling that he's dangerous." "We need to dig deeper," Alex said decisively. "Let's meet up. I have some old files from when we were looking for Jenna. Maybe there's something in there that can help us figure this out." I agreed, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. "Where should we meet?" "How about the old diner on Maple Street? It's been ages since we've been there. We can talk without being interrupted." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of purpose wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I had a plan. I would find out the truth about Jenna and confront the shadows of my past. As I prepared to leave, Mrs. Thompson caught me at the door. "Where are you headed?" she asked, her expression one of concern. "I'm meeting an old friend," I replied, trying to sound casual. "We're going to talk about Jenna." She frowned, her brow furrowing with worry. "Be careful. I don't like the sound of this. If you see anything suspicious, come straight back." "I will," I promised, feeling a mixture of gratitude and apprehension as I stepped outside into the evening air. The world felt different now, charged with the weight of unresolved mysteries. I made my way to the diner, the familiar sights bringing a rush of nostalgia. As I walked through the door, the smell of coffee and greasy fries enveloped me, instantly bringing back memories of laughter and late-night talks with friends. But tonight, there was no joy in the air, only tension and a sense of urgency. Alex was already seated in a booth, his expression serious. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing for me to sit. I slid into the seat across from him, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. "Have you found anything about Kyle?" He nodded, pulling out a worn folder from his bag. "I've kept some notes from when we were searching for Jenna. I thought it might help us remember details we overlooked." As he laid out the papers, I scanned them quickly. Old newspaper clippings, photographs of our friends smiling with us, and snippets of conversations we had shared about her last known whereabouts. My heart sank as I read through the accounts of her disappearance, the sense of helplessness washing over me once again. "Look at this," Alex said, pointing to a particular article. "Kyle was the last person to see her before she disappeared. He claimed they had a fight, but there were no witnesses. Could he have hurt her?" I asked, dread settling in my stomach. "Maybe," he replied, his voice heavy. "But the police couldn't find enough evidence to charge him. He became a ghost after that. It's like he just vanished." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. "And now I think he's back." Alex looked at me with intensity. "We need to report this again. If you're being watched, it's possible he's looking for something. Maybe he's trying to finish what he started." As we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if someone was lurking just beyond the glass, observing our every move. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, concern etched on his face. "You look pale." I glanced around the diner, and that's when I saw him, standing outside, just beyond the glass door. The man from my nightmares. My heart dropped, and I instinctively leaned closer to Alex, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's here." Alex turned to look, but the figure was already gone, swallowed by the shadows of the night. "What? Are you sure?" I nodded, my heart racing. "I saw him. He was watching us." "Let's get out of here," Alex said, urgency creeping into his tone. We both stood up, and I could feel a chill run down my spine as we made our way to the exit. Just as we reached the door, it swung open violently, and a gust of wind rushed inside, bringing with it a cold feeling that wrapped around me like a shroud. Standing in the doorway was a tall figure cloaked in darkness, his face obscured. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you think you could run from me?" The figure growled, and my blood ran cold as I recognized the voice. "Get back!" Alex shouted, stepping in front of me protectively. But the figure advanced, a malicious smile breaking through the shadows. "You think you can escape your past?" I felt frozen in place, fear gripping me. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I wouldn't let this man dictate my life any longer. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice strong despite the terror surging through me. He laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the diner. "I'm the nightmare you thought you could wake up from. And now, it's time to finish what I started." The diner fell into a heavy silence, the kind that hangs thick in the air before a storm. My heart raced as I faced the figure in the doorway, the man who had haunted my dreams and stalked my waking hours. His presence was suffocating, a dark cloud of menace that filled the space around us. "Who are you?" I repeated, my voice steadier now, bolstered by a mix of fear and determination. The man stepped forward, the fluorescent lights illuminating his face. Recognition surged through me, and I gasped. It was Kyle. Time had altered him, but there was no mistaking the familiar features twisted with an unsettling smile. "You remember me," he said, his voice low and taunting. "I've missed you, you know. I've been watching you. It's funny how life brings us back together, isn't it?" Alex shifted closer to me, his body tense and ready. "What do you want, Kyle?" he demanded, his voice firm but edged with anxiety. Kyle chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "What do I want? You really have to ask? I want what's mine, what you all took from me." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "You think I took anything from you? Jenna was our friend. You hurt her." My voice was rising, fueled by the anger and grief that had festered for years. Kyle's smile faltered for a split second before returning, more sinister than before. "You don't understand. She was never meant to leave. I only wanted to protect her from the world." "Protect her?" I spat. You suffocated her. You were obsessed. And when she tried to break free my voice faltered, the memory of Jenna's laughter twisting into an echo of sorrow. You hurt her. Kyle stepped closer, and I could see the crazed look in his eyes. No one can understand our love. You all think you know what happened, but you don't. And now, you'll pay the price for what you did. What do you mean, pay the price? Alex asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. You think you could just waltz back in here after all these years and threaten us? You're delusional. I'm not delusional, Kyle shot back, his voice rising. I've been biding my time, watching and waiting. You all thought I disappeared, but I was always here, lurking in the shadows. Jenna's ghost has kept me alive all this time, and now you'll help me set things right. Help you? I scoffed, incredulous. You think I'd ever help you? You're a monster. Kyle's face twisted in rage, his demeanor shifting as he took another step forward. You'll regret this. You don't know what you're messing with. Let's go, Alex whispered urgently, grabbing my arm as he backed toward the exit. But Kyle was quicker, lunging forward and blocking our path. In that moment, adrenaline surged through me, and I pushed past my fear. You're not going to take anything from us, I declared, standing tall. You'll never hurt anyone again. Kyle's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his face at my defiance. You think you can stop me? You think you're strong enough? But the truth was, I was tired of running, tired of being a prisoner of my own fears. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I shouted, "Get away from us." As if on cue, the diner's door swung open, and a flood of people rushed in, drawn by the commotion. The unexpected influx of patrons caught Kyle off guard, and in that instant, the tide shifted. "Run!" Alex shouted, pulling me toward the exit. We dashed through the throng of people, our hearts racing as we burst into the cool night air. The sounds of the diner faded behind us, replaced by the quiet rustle of the wind. Once outside, we didn't stop. We sprinted down the street, not looking back, the adrenaline coursing through our veins. We finally slowed near a streetlight, gasping for breath. Did we lose him? I panted, glancing over my shoulder. I think so, Alex replied, his eyes wide with panic. But we can't stop now. We need to report this to the police. They need to know he's back. Nodding, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. My hands shook as I recounted the events, every detail spilling out in a rush. He's dangerous, I insisted. He's been watching me. He's responsible for Jenna's disappearance. Stay where you are, the operator instructed, calm and steady. Officers are on their way. Do you have a safe place to go? I exchanged a glance with Alex, and we both knew that staying at home wasn't an option anymore. We'll wait here. Just hurry, I urged before hanging up. As we waited, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Kyle was back, and this time, he wouldn't just disappear into the shadows. I could feel it in my bones. He would come for me again, but I wouldn't be afraid anymore. I would fight back. The distant sound of sirens pierced the quiet night, a reassuring reminder that help was on the way. When the police arrived, they quickly surrounded us, their expressions serious and focused. We received a report about a man threatening you. Can you describe him? One officer asked, taking notes. He's tall, with dark hair and a twisted sense of obsession. I replied, my voice steady. He was Jenna's ex-boyfriend, and he's been stalking me. He said he wanted revenge for her disappearance. The officers exchanged glances, and I could see the concern in their eyes. We'll take it from here, another officer said firmly. We'll search the area. As they moved out, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the tension in my chest easing. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. With Alex by my side and the police on alert, I had a chance to reclaim my life. I had faced the darkness, and I would continue to fight against it, for Jenna and for myself. As the night unfolded, I realized that the journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to confront whatever shadows lay in wait. The memory of Jenna lingered in my heart, a reminder of the past, but I would not let it define my future. Epilogue, a new dawn. Days turned into weeks as the investigation into Kyle intensified. The police worked tirelessly, combing through every lead and piece of evidence they could find. With Alex's help, I gathered information about Jenna's case and reported everything I knew, and together, we began to unravel the truth. Kyle was apprehended after a tip-off from a witness who had seen him lurking near my house. The moment I learned he was behind bars, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Justice was finally being served, and I could begin to heal. In the weeks that followed, I started to regain my sense of normalcy. The fear that had clouded my life began to lift, replaced by a determination to honor Jenna's memory by living fully. I started attending therapy sessions where I could process my trauma and gradually reclaim my life. And with every session, I felt lighter, as if the weight of the past was being slowly lifted off my shoulders. The friends who had stood by me during those difficult days began to return, rebuilding our connections and sharing laughter once again. As summer turned to autumn, I found myself standing on my porch, looking out at the vibrant hues of the leaves, a reminder that change was possible. I could finally feel the warmth of the sun on my face without the shadow of fear looming over me. One evening, I sat on the porch with Alex, watching the stars twinkle above. "Do you think we'll ever know what really happened to Jenna?" I asked, my voice soft. He nodded thoughtfully. "I think we will in time. The truth has a way of revealing itself, even if it takes longer than we hope." With that thought in mind, I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. No longer would I allow the shadows to define my life. Jenna would always be a part of me, a reminder of the love we had shared, but I would also create new memories, ones that honored her spirit and allowed me to truly live. As the stars shone brightly overhead, I whispered a silent promise to her. I would never forget. I would keep her memory alive, no matter what. With the man who had haunted my dreams behind bars and the future stretching ahead, I was finally ready to move forward. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let's begin the next story. It was a mundane Tuesday morning when I first noticed it, a small, folded piece of paper lying on the kitchen counter. The sunlight streaming through the window illuminated the note, casting a curious shadow that seemed to dance as I approached. I had just returned home from my early morning jog, still feeling the exhilaration of the crisp air and the rhythmic pounding of my heart. I hadn't left any notes for myself, so my curiosity was piqued. I picked it up, feeling the weight of its mystery. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if it had been hurriedly stuffed there, and there was an unsettling sense of foreboding that crept over me. My heart raced as I unfolded it, revealing an elegant but jagged handwriting that read, "I know you think you're safe, but I'm always watching, always close." A chill ran down my spine. My mind raced with possibilities. Who had written this? Was it a prank? A joke gone too far? The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I looked around the kitchen, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, a figure just out of sight. I tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to my overactive imagination. After all, my neighborhood was relatively quiet and safe. I had never encountered anything out of the ordinary since moving in. I made myself a cup of coffee, hoping the comforting aroma would ease my racing heart. But as I sipped, my thoughts returned to the note. It gnawed at me, a dark cloud looming over my otherwise peaceful morning. I decided to investigate. My first instinct was to check the rest of the house. I moved cautiously from room to room, the familiar creaks of the floorboards beneath my feet echoing like whispers in the silence. Each room felt strangely foreign, as if they were no longer mine, but the backdrop to a haunting tale. In the living room, I checked behind the curtains, peered into the corners, and even opened the closet, half expecting to find someone hiding inside. My heart sank each time I found nothing. I felt foolish, but the note had unsettled me deeply. Was I being watched? The thought was unsettling enough to make me double-check the locks on all the doors and windows. After searching every inch of my home, I sat back down at the kitchen table, staring at the note again. It felt like a warning, a taunt from someone who knew my routine, my life. Who could it be? The thought of a stranger knowing my daily habits made my skin crawl. As I sat there, my phone buzzed on the table. The sudden noise made me jump, and I glanced at the screen, feeling a moment of relief when I saw it was just a text from my friend, Anna. But the feeling was short-lived as my mind returned to the note. What if I wasn't safe? What if someone really was watching me? "Hey, are we still on for lunch?" the message read. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I considered what to reply. Should I tell Anna about the note? Would it sound ridiculous? Eventually, I opted for a vague response. "Yeah, see you at noon." After sending the message, I found myself constantly checking the time, counting down the minutes until I could escape the confines of my home and its oppressive silence. I needed the distraction, the comfort of being around someone who knew me. Maybe Anna could help me make sense of everything. As I got ready, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, the unease wrapping around my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I stepped outside into the warm sunlight, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. But as I glanced back at my house, the windows seemed to stare back at me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The day wore on, and despite my best efforts to focus on the conversation with Anna, my mind kept drifting back to the note. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit and wait for the next message, the next sign that someone was lurking in the shadows. As I left the cafe, I resolved to take matters into my own hands. I would find out who had sent the note, and why they felt the need to disturb my life. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as I returned home from the cafe. My heart raced with determination, but the comforting buzz of conversation had faded, replaced by the eerie quiet of my empty house. The moment I crossed the threshold, the note's sinister message echoed in my mind. "I'm always watching, always close." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that fear could not dictate my actions. I had decided to take a proactive approach. My first step was to search for any clues about who might have written the note. I grabbed my laptop and sat down at the dining table, my fingers trembling as I opened a new browser tab. My first search query: how to know if someone is watching you. I sifted through articles and forums, each one detailing signs of being watched. Anxiety gnawed at me as I read about people who had experienced similar unsettling feelings. I jotted down potential signs and methods to enhance my security. Change your routine. Increase your awareness. Install security cameras, one article suggested. The idea of installing cameras appealed to me, but it also felt like an admission of defeat, acknowledging that my home might not be the safe haven I believed it to be. I quickly ordered 2 security cameras online, my resolve growing with each passing moment. While waiting for the delivery, I took stock of my surroundings. I scoured my home for anything that seemed out of place: a misplaced object, an open window, or a hidden camera. I felt like a detective in a thriller, piecing together the puzzle. I retraced my steps from the past few days, mentally cataloging everything I could remember. Had I noticed anyone strange lurking around? Had there been any odd noises? Nothing stood out, but the unsettling feeling remained, making me hyper-aware of every creak of the house and rustle of leaves outside. Then I recalled a figure I'd seen in my peripheral vision while jogging. It was a man standing at the edge of the park, partially obscured by trees. I had brushed it off as a trick of the light, but now I couldn't shake the memory. Had he been watching me? Had he followed me home? My heart raced at the thought, and I forced myself to push it away. I needed to focus on the present, not on shadows of the past. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, the covers pulled tight around me, listening to every sound that filtered through the walls. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of crickets, and the occasional rustle of leaves outside felt amplified in the silence. I could have sworn I heard footsteps, faint but distinct, echoing through the house. I sat up, straining to hear, my heart pounding in my chest. Was someone really in my house? Panic surged, and I grabbed my phone, prepared to call 911 if necessary. After a few moments of silence, I summoned the courage to step out of bed and investigate. With my phone flashlight illuminating the dark hallway, I tiptoed through my house. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential hiding spot. I checked the bathroom, the living room, and finally the kitchen where the note had first appeared. The sight of the note lying on the table sent a chill down my spine. I had hoped that perhaps it would have vanished, but there it was, taunting me. As I stood there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I fumbled to retrieve it, heart racing when I saw it was a text message. It was from an unknown number. You shouldn't have read the note. A surge of adrenaline shot through me, followed by a wave of nausea. Who was this person? I stared at the message, my mind racing with possibilities. Could this be a prank? Or was it the same person who had sent the note? I quickly texted back. Who is this? There was no immediate response. I paced the kitchen, heart pounding, the fear creeping back in. After a few minutes of anxious waiting, my phone buzzed again. You'll find out soon enough. That was it. I felt a mix of anger and terror. This wasn't just a prank. It was a game, and I was caught in the middle. I had to take action, and I had to do it quickly. I decided to reach out to the police. They might think I was overreacting, but I didn't care. I dialed the non-emergency line and explained the situation, feeling the weight of my words as I described the note and the strange texts. After hanging up, I felt a little more at ease, knowing that I had taken the first step in regaining control. The officer on the line had promised to send someone to investigate, but they wouldn't arrive until morning. I would have to spend the night on high alert. I made my way back to my bedroom, determined to stay awake, armed with my phone and a bottle of water. The hours dragged on as I kept vigil, every creak of the house causing my heart to race. As dawn approached, I felt my eyelids growing heavy, battling exhaustion. But just as I began to drift off, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, jolting me upright. My heart raced as I scrambled out of bed, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I gripped my phone tightly and quietly made my way down the stairs, dread pooling in my stomach. The crash had come from the living room. As I crept down the stairs, every instinct told me to turn back. The living room was dark, save for the faint light coming from the street lamp outside. I approached the doorway, my heart pounding in my ears, almost drowning out the sounds of my own breath. The adrenaline surged through me, sharpening my senses. I stood still, peering into the room. The silence was oppressive, only broken by the faint rustle of something shifting. Then I saw it, a silhouette flickering against the wall. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but all I could discern was a shadowy figure standing in the center of my living room, motionless. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky yet firm. I immediately regretted it, wishing I had kept silent. The figure didn't move, and for a moment, I considered running back upstairs. But fear spurred me forward instead. I flicked on the hallway light, illuminating the room. The figure was gone. Confusion washed over me as I stepped cautiously into the living room, scanning every corner. My heart sank as I spotted the source of the noise, a small lamp that had fallen from the side table, its bulb shattered on the floor. I crouched to examine the mess, heart racing with each crackle of glass beneath my fingertips. Had the lamp simply been unstable? Or was there something more sinister at play? Just then, my phone buzzed again, a message from the unknown number lighting up the screen. "You really shouldn't have made a sound." I felt a cold chill creep up my spine, but I refused to be paralyzed by fear. I typed back, "What do you want from me?" The response came almost immediately. "To show you how close I really am." Panic surged through me, but I couldn't afford to succumb to it. I quickly glanced around the room, hyper-aware of my surroundings. The windows were locked, the door secure. At least I thought so. But then a thought struck me. The back door. I dashed to the kitchen, my heart pounding as I reached for the handle. My mind raced with scenarios. What if the intruder had already slipped away? Or worse, what if they were still in the house? When I reached the door, I found it ajar. I froze, dread pooling in my stomach. Had I left it open? I distinctly remembered checking it before bed. The air outside felt thick and heavy, almost suffocating. I had to know. I slowly pushed the door open, and it creaked ominously. The backyard was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of the streetlights. I scanned the area for any sign of movement, but the silence was deafening. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering. The night swallowed my words, leaving me feeling more vulnerable than ever. Suddenly, a rustling noise to my right caught my attention. I turned quickly, holding my breath. I could see the outline of a figure hiding behind the tree, its shape barely visible in the dim light. My heart raced. Was it the same figure from before? I took a cautious step forward, instinctively reaching for my phone to use its light. As I did, the figure stepped out from behind the tree, revealing a man dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by shadows. "Who are you?" I shouted, the fear in my voice replaced by anger. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back. "You shouldn't have read the note," he finally said, his voice low and haunting. "Now you'll understand what it means to be watched." With every word, my heart sank deeper. I could feel the weight of his gaze piercing through the darkness, his presence suffocating. Panic surged again, and I turned on my heel, sprinting back into the house. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the deadbolt. I glanced through the peephole, my breath hitching in my throat as I saw him standing there, still watching, a dark silhouette against the pale moonlight. I rushed to the living room, adrenaline coursing through me as I dialed 911. The operator answered almost immediately, her voice calm and professional. "911, what's your emergency?" "I need help. Someone is outside my house. I think they're trying to get in." My voice cracked with fear. I could still see him standing there, unmoving, his presence sending chills down my spine. "Stay on the line with me." "Can you tell me your location?" the operator asked, her voice steady. "I'm at 142 Maple Street," I shouted, glancing nervously at the door. "He's just outside. He knows I'm in here. Help is on the way." "I need you to find a safe place to hide until they arrive," she instructed. I looked around, my mind racing. The kitchen would be the most defensible spot. I dashed into the room, ducking beneath the counter and squeezing into the space between the cabinets. My heart hammered in my chest as I held my breath, listening intently for any sounds. Through the thin walls, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps moving around outside. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remain quiet. Minutes felt like hours as I sat in the darkness, my mind racing. What did this man want? How long had he been watching me? The answers eluded me, but the terror kept me focused. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang against the door, jolting me from my thoughts. My heart dropped. He was trying to break in. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp, praying the police would arrive soon. "Please," I whispered under my breath, desperate for help. The door rattled violently, sending shivers down my spine. I pressed myself further into the space beneath the kitchen counter, heart racing, every muscle tense with fear. I strained to hear through the chaos, the pounding echoing like a war drum. It was the only sound that filled the suffocating silence. "Please," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "Let the police arrive soon." Each impact against the door felt like a countdown, and I fought the urge to scream as I imagined the intruder's face, twisted in anger or something worse. Finally, there was a pause, a momentary stillness that seemed to stretch indefinitely. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if he had stepped back, but I stayed frozen, breath held, eyes glued to the door. The faint hum of my phone buzzed from the counter, reminding me I still had the call with the operator ongoing. "Are you still there?" The operator's voice broke through the silence, her tone steady but urgent. "Can you give me an update on your situation?" "Yes, I'm still here," I stammered, trying to keep my voice low. "He's trying to get in. I don't know if he's left or not. I can't see anything." "Stay hidden and quiet," she instructed. "Help is on the way. I need you to keep me updated on any changes." I nodded, forgetting she couldn't see me. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing to steady my racing heart. The silence stretched on, dragging me deeper into a state of heightened awareness. Then I heard it, a soft scrape against the doorframe. A chill ran through me as I realized the intruder was still there, lingering just outside. I risked a glance through the small gap beneath the cabinet. My eyes widened as I caught a glimpse of a dark boot sliding into view, just beyond the threshold. "Please, please hurry," I whispered into the phone. Just then, I heard another sound, a series of rapid footsteps approaching from the direction of the street. My heart leaped. Was it the police? Or was it someone else? "Stay quiet," the operator urged. "Don't make any noise." I held my breath, pressing myself against the cold floor. The footsteps grew louder, and I could feel the tension in the air. Then, Suddenly, the door burst open, slamming against the wall. My breath hitched as I heard the sound of heavy footsteps stomping into my house. The stranger had gotten inside. Come out, wherever you are," a voice taunted, low and menacing. Panic surged within me. I didn't know how long I could stay hidden. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. But where could I go? I couldn't risk being seen. "Sir, are you still there?" The operator's voice broke through my fear again, but I couldn't respond. I was frozen, staring at the shadows flickering across the kitchen walls as the intruder moved about my home. He was searching for me, and I couldn't let him find me. Suddenly, I remembered the back window. It was my only escape. If I could reach it, maybe I could slip away unnoticed. I waited for a moment, listening carefully for any sign that he was leaving the room. The footsteps echoed through the house, drawing closer to the kitchen. My heart raced, and I knew I had to act fast. Taking a deep breath, I slowly crawled out from under the counter, careful not to make a sound. I could see the back door now, but I needed to cross the kitchen to get to it. I peered around the corner, spotting the figure rummaging through my living room, his back turned to me. This was my chance. I bolted for the back door, heart pounding in my chest as I quietly swung it open. The cool night air washed over me, filling my lungs with hope and fear all at once. Just as I stepped outside, I heard the operator shout through the phone, "Get out of the house now. The police are just arriving." With every ounce of adrenaline coursing through my veins, I sprinted across the backyard. I could see the flashing lights of police cars approaching down the street, but I didn't stop to look back. I had to put distance between me and the intruder. Just as I reached the front of my house, I felt a sudden grip on my shoulder. I gasped and spun around, ready to fight back. But instead of the stranger, I found myself face to face with a police officer. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked urgently, scanning my face for signs of distress. "There's someone in my house," I shouted, my voice shaking. He was just inside. Without wasting a moment, the officer radioed for backup, gesturing for me to stay back. Other officers rushed toward my front door, weapons drawn and ready. I watched in anxious silence as they stormed inside, shouting commands for anyone inside to come out. My heart raced as I strained to hear any sounds from within. Minutes passed like an eternity before the lead officer stepped back outside, a look of confusion etched on his face. "There's no one in there, ma'am," he said, glancing at me with concern. "We searched every room." "What do you mean?" "I saw him," I pleaded, my voice rising in panic. "He was here. He was right here." The officer placed a calming hand on my shoulder. "I believe you, but there's no one inside. Are you sure he didn't leave before we got here?" I shook my head vigorously, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I know what I saw. Let's take a moment to gather your thoughts," he suggested, leading me away from the house. "You're safe now, and we'll find out what happened." I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "But the note," I stammered. "It had to mean something. Someone is watching me." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "We'll need to see that note. It could provide crucial information. Can you tell us what it said?" Just then, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket again. I pulled it out, trembling as I saw a new message from the unknown number. "You can't hide forever. I'm always watching." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking as the words loomed over me like a dark cloud. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet as dread washed over me. "Ma'am," the officer's voice broke through my thoughts. "What's wrong?" I held up my phone, the fear palpable in my voice. "He's still out there," I whispered, shaking. The officer took the phone from me, reading the message. He turned to his partner, urgency in his voice. "We need to set up a perimeter. If someone is threatening her, we need to find them now." I stood back, watching as they radioed for backup, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I felt exposed, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. I had to confront the reality that I wasn't just dealing with a stranger. I was facing someone who had made it their mission to invade my life. The scene outside my home felt surreal as the officers moved about, coordinating their efforts with a sense of urgency. The flashing lights illuminated the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. I could barely process the reality of what had happened. "Ma'am," "I need you to come with me," an officer said, motioning for me to follow him to a nearby patrol car. I nodded, still in shock, my mind racing with thoughts of the note and the figure I had seen. They wanted to talk to me, to gather more information, but I could barely form coherent sentences. Once inside the car, the officer turned to me, his demeanor serious yet kind. "I need you to tell me everything that's happened. Start from the beginning." I took a deep breath, trying to recall the events leading up to this moment. "I found a note," I began, my voice trembling. "It was just sitting on my kitchen counter when I got home. It was from a stranger, and it said I was being watched." The officer nodded, taking notes. "What else did it say?" "There was something about knowing me, knowing my routine. I thought it was a prank at first, but then I started feeling like someone was actually following me." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. "And then tonight, I heard someone outside my window. I thought I saw a shadow, and that's when I called the police." He listened attentively, his eyes focused on me. "Did you see the person who left the note? Or anyone else suspicious in the area?" I shook my head, tears threatening to spill again. "No, I never saw anyone, but the feeling, there's just this heaviness, like I'm not alone even when I am." He glanced toward the house as another officer approached with the note I had written down. "This note you found, can you read it for me again?" I took the crumpled paper from the officer's hand, smoothing it out as best as I could. My fingers trembled as I read it aloud, the familiar words cutting through the air like a knife. "I know your routine. You can't hide from me. I see you every day." I glanced up at the officer, my heart pounding. What does it mean? Who would do something like this? The officer's brow furrowed, and he exchanged a glance with his partner, who stood by the door of the car. "We'll figure this out," he reassured me. "But we need to take this seriously. This could be a case of stalking." Stalking. The word hung heavily in the air, filling me with dread. "But why me? I haven't done anything to deserve this." "Unfortunately, that's often how it goes," he explained. "Stalkers can be fixated on their victims for any number of reasons. It's about control, manipulation. You might be seen as someone they want to possess, someone they feel they can dominate." As he spoke, I felt the chill of fear settle deeper in my bones. "But I don't even know who this person is. What if they come back? We'll increase patrols in your area and provide you with options for security measures at home," the officer said firmly. "But you need to stay vigilant. If you see or hear anything else, you call us immediately. Understood?" I nodded, trying to gather my scattered thoughts. The officers finished taking my statement, assuring me they would keep an eye on the area. I felt their presence, like a lifeline in the chaos that surrounded me. As they left, I stood in the middle of the living room, the remnants of my safety shattered. My home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even with the police here. Once they departed, I forced myself to move. I paced the house, checking the locks on all the doors and windows, my heart racing with every click. I wanted to feel safe, but the uncertainty clawed at me. That night, I hardly slept. I tossed and turned, jumping at every noise. Each creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps, and each gust of wind sounded like whispers from the shadows. I kept the lights on, convinced that illumination would ward off any lurking darkness. As dawn broke, I found myself staring out the window, scanning the street for any sign of danger. I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, watering her plants. I waved hesitantly, but she didn't seem to notice me. Suddenly, I caught a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, heart racing, and saw a figure in the distance. Someone standing across the street, shrouded in shadows. They wore a dark hoodie pulled tight around their face, and I couldn't make out any features. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively took a step back from the window, heart pounding in my chest. I felt the urge to scream, but held it back, not wanting to alert the figure. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police again, but then the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning fog. It was a false alarm, I told myself. I tried to convince myself it was just a passerby, yet the feeling of dread remained, the shadows lurking in the corners of my mind, whispering doubts and fears that gnawed at my sanity. I made it through the day in a daze, jumping at the slightest sound. I kept the curtains drawn tight, peeking through the gaps to scan the street outside. My world had shrunk to the confines of my home, and I felt like a prisoner in my own life. That evening, I returned home after a brief outing, hoping that a change of scenery would calm my nerves. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of despair settle over me again. I approached the kitchen, my heart dropping when I saw it. A new note waiting for me on the counter. "You think you can hide? I know everything about you. You'll never escape me." My breath hitched as I read the chilling words, the implications sinking in. I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone and called the police once again, desperate for help. 911. "What's your emergency?" the operator asked, and I could barely choke out my words. I received another note. "I'm scared. I think someone is in my house." "Stay where you are," the operator instructed, her tone steady. "We'll send someone over right away." "Is there anyone else with you?" "No, I'm alone." I nearly sobbed, my panic rising again. "Please hurry." As I hung up, I could hear the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. My heart raced, and the world spun around me. I clutched my phone tightly, ready to use it as a weapon if I needed to. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to scream. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. But there was no answer, only silence, thick and suffocating. I felt the darkness closing in around me, and for the first time, I truly believed that I might not make it through this night. The silence was deafening, and every second felt like an eternity. I stood frozen in the kitchen, clutching my phone tightly as I strained to listen for any sign of movement. The air was thick with tension, and my heart raced as I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Then I heard it, a faint rustling from the hallway, like fabric brushing against the wall. My pulse quickened, an instinct kicked in. I backed away from the kitchen, my eyes darting toward the front door, wishing I could just run away from this nightmare. But I knew I couldn't leave without knowing if the threat was real. "Who's there?" I called out again, my voice louder this time, steadier. The words echoed back at me, swallowed by the silence. I felt the panic rise within me, squeezing my chest tighter. I was alone, trapped in a house with an unknown danger lurking in the shadows. Taking a shaky breath, I decided to inch toward the hallway, where the sound had come from. I moved carefully, every creak of the floor beneath me feeling like a siren warning of impending doom. As I approached, I noticed the shadows in the hallway seemed deeper, almost alive. I could see the outlines of furniture, the edges of pictures on the walls, but nothing else. My breath was shallow, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, urging me to run but holding me in place. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, and I jumped back, nearly dropping my phone. I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps, trudging toward me. It was like a scene from a horror movie, where the protagonist always goes upstairs instead of fleeing. But I couldn't just stand here. I had to know what was happening. In a burst of courage, I stepped back toward the stairs, adrenaline masking my fear. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to climb the first step, the wood creaking under my weight. I listened intently for any indication of what might be waiting for me at the top. "Please, just be a figment of my imagination," I whispered, hoping desperately that the sound was nothing but my mind playing tricks. When I reached the landing, I took a deep breath and peered down the hallway. The bathroom door stood ajar, and I noticed the light was on. I approached slowly, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a shroud. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart raced in my chest. There was no response. As I turned to the bathroom door, I noticed the window was open, the curtains billowing softly in the cool evening breeze. I stepped closer, peering inside, and my breath caught in my throat. There was a mirror hanging above the sink, and my reflection stared back at me wide-eyed and terrified. But as I glanced over my shoulder, I could have sworn I saw a shadow flicker just out of sight in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, only the dark hallway stretching out before me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the dread creeping in. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, forcing my feet to move toward the far end of the hall. As I passed the other rooms, I hesitated at the door to my bedroom. I wanted nothing more than to curl up under the covers and hide from the world. But I needed to make sure no one was there before I could feel safe enough to do that. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was dark, shadows clinging to the corners, but the bed was empty, the sheets undisturbed. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and allowed myself a moment of relief. I crossed to the window, glancing outside for any sign of danger, and my heart sank when I saw a figure standing across the street once again. They were dressed in a dark hoodie, just as before, and although I couldn't make out their face, I felt their gaze burning into me. Before I could think, I instinctively backed away from the window, my pulse quickening again. Why were they always watching? I grabbed my phone again, my hands shaking as I debated whether to call the police again. Then, just as I was about to dial, I heard a sound, a faint scratching noise coming from my bedroom door. My heart stopped. I glanced over my shoulder, the phone slipping from my fingers and hitting the floor with a thud. The scratching grew louder, a slow, deliberate sound that made my skin crawl. I held my breath, feeling every nerve in my body come alive with fear. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. There was no answer, only the relentless scratching. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I mustered enough courage to approach the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening intently. Suddenly, the door swung open with a creak, and I stumbled back in shock. Standing there was the police officer I had spoken to earlier, his face grave. "Ma'am, we need to get you out of here. Now," he said, his tone urgent. "What's happening?" I stammered, confusion mixing with fear. "We receive a call about suspicious activity in the area. We have reason to believe someone is targeting you," he explained, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Targeting me? But why?" "We don't know yet," he replied, his voice firm. "But you're not safe here. We need to take you to a safe location." Before I could protest, he took my arm gently but firmly, leading me toward the door. "Gather what you need, and let's move quickly." I felt a rush of panic as I grabbed my phone and wallet, unsure of what else I should take. My heart raced as I considered the reality of leaving my home. The place that had once felt so safe now turned into a prison of fear. "Is it really that serious?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he affirmed, his expression serious. "We'll explain everything once we're out of here. Just trust me." With my heart pounding in my chest, I stepped out of the house, the weight of dread lifting slightly as the cool night air hit me. The officer led me to a police car parked at the curb, and I glanced back at my home one last time, feeling a sense of loss wash over me. The officer helped me into the back seat, and as we drove away, I stared out the window, watching my home fade into the distance. I didn't know what awaited me or who had been watching me all this time, but one thing was clear. I was no longer in control of my life. As we drove through the darkened streets, I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. I was safe, at least for now. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a battle I was determined to fight. The police car felt like a cocoon, a barrier between me and the outside world. I sank into the seat, staring out of the window as the city lights blurred past. My mind raced, bombarded by thoughts of what had happened. The officer driving, Officer Grant, was silent, focusing on the road, but I could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just my fear, it was his too, and it only heightened my anxiety. After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at a modest brick building. A few police cars were parked out front, and uniformed officers moved about with purpose. The weight of dread settled back onto my shoulders as I climbed out of the car. "This is a safe house," Officer Grant explained, guiding me through the entrance. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a small lobby area. A receptionist sat behind a counter, her face etched with concern as she looked up at us. "Another one," she murmured, glancing back at her computer screen. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing again. "Just that we've had a few people come in today." "Same situation," she replied, her eyes flitting to me and then back to Officer Grant. "They're probably just trying to scare you, but better safe than sorry." "Great," I muttered, rubbing my temples. My head throbbed with the weight of it all. Officer Grant led me through a narrow hallway to a small room. "This will be your space for now," he said, opening the door to reveal a sparsely furnished room with a bed, a desk, and a chair. I stepped inside, my breath hitching. What if they find me here? That's why we have a system in place. "You'll be safe here," he assured me, his tone firm. "We'll have officers stationed outside and surveillance cameras monitoring the area. You'll also have a phone here to reach me or anyone else if you need assistance." "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a flicker of gratitude amidst the fear. "I'll give you some time to settle in," he said, stepping back. "Just remember to stay alert. Don't open the door for anyone except for me or another officer." With that, he left me alone in the room, and the silence enveloped me. I sank onto the bed, letting out a shaky breath. My thoughts were chaotic, swirling around the stranger, the note, and the looming fear of being watched. I needed answers, and I had to make sense of everything that had happened. Reaching for my phone, I scrolled through my contacts until I found my best friend, Sarah. She had always been my rock, the one person who could help me process my thoughts. I hesitated, biting my lip. Would she even understand what I was going through? I pressed the call button, my heart racing as I waited for her to pick up. After a few rings, she answered, her voice familiar and comforting. "Hey, I was just about to call you. Are you okay?" "I'm not really," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I found a note in my house, and then things escalated from there." "What do you mean? What did the note say?" As I recounted the details of the note and everything that had transpired, I could feel the weight on my shoulders lightening just a little. Sarah listened intently, her silence giving me the space I needed to pour out my fears. "Wow, that's terrifying," she finally said. "But you're safe now, right? You're in a safe house." "Yeah, but I can't shake this feeling that someone is still out there watching me," I replied, glancing nervously at the door. "I don't know how to feel safe again." "You will," she reassured me. "Just focus on taking care of yourself for now. I'll come to see you as soon as I can." "Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate it," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me. After we hung up, I sat in the small room, my mind racing. I needed to know more about the note, the stranger, and why they had targeted me. I resolved to do some research, but first, I had to calm my nerves. I took a few deep breaths, reminding myself that I was safe for the moment. I stood up and began pacing the room, letting the anxiety ebb and flow. Finally, I settled at the desk, flipping through a stack of papers left there. Most were mundane documents, but one caught my eye. It was a report about a string of break-ins in the area, all linked to similar notes being left behind. My heart sank as I read through the details. Each victim had received a note that mentioned their routines, their habits, and personal details that only someone watching them closely would know. Was I just another target? A piece of a larger puzzle? The thought made my stomach churn. I spent the next hour reading through the report, trying to connect the dots. All the victims were just like me, ordinary people, living their lives, unaware they were being watched. It didn't make sense. As the night deepened, I felt the exhaustion wash over me. I knew I needed to rest, but the dread settled back into my bones. How could I sleep knowing that someone was out there, possibly watching me even now? Eventually, I lay down, my eyes glued to the ceiling. I tried to block out the racing thoughts, but sleep eluded me. I thought of the note, the stranger, and the shadowy figure that had invaded my life. After what felt like hours, I finally drifted off, my dreams plagued with images of the figure standing outside my window, waiting, watching. The next morning dawned gray and dreary, as if the weather mirrored the heaviness in my chest. I woke up feeling groggy, my body still heavy with the remnants of a restless night. The realization hit me hard. I was still in the safe house, hidden away from the world, yet unable to shake off the unease that settled around me like a thick fog. After a quick shower, I dressed in the spare clothes they had provided me, a simple set of sweatpants and a t-shirt that felt foreign against my skin. The room was small and plain, yet it was a temporary refuge from the terror outside. I took a moment to breathe, mentally preparing myself for what lay ahead. Just as I was contemplating my next move, a soft knock echoed from the door, making my heart skip a beat. I held my breath, listening intently as the knob turned. Officer Grant stepped in, his expression serious but softer than before. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "I don't know," I admitted, fidgeting with the hem of my shirt. "I still feel trapped. What if the stranger finds me here? That's why we're taking precautions. The station is coordinating with local units to keep an eye on your neighborhood. We're also doing a deeper investigation into those notes," he reassured me. "We'll find out who did this." I nodded, grateful for his effort, but uncertainty gnawed at me. What if they're already in my head? I can't even look out the window without feeling like someone is watching me. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're safe here, but you need to stay vigilant. If anything feels off, you call for help immediately." I promised him I would, but deep down, I felt a persistent dread. After Officer Grant left, I spent the day pacing the small room, trying to distract myself with mundane tasks. I scrolled through my phone, checking social media and scrolling through the news. Anything to take my mind off the ominous atmosphere pressing in on me. Later, I returned to the stack of papers on the desk, rifling through the reports of the previous victims once again. Each note was similar in tone, filled with unsettling observations about their lives. It was a twisted game, and I felt sick imagining what they must have felt, realizing they weren't as alone as they thought. Then a thought struck me. What if there was something more to these notes? Perhaps they weren't just random observations, but clues or messages. Maybe if I could decode them, I could figure out who was watching me and why. Fueled by this new determination, I grabbed a pen and began jotting down the phrases and details from the notes that stood out to me. I dissected each word, trying to find patterns or connections. Hours flew by, and soon, a knock interrupted my concentration again. This time it was Sarah. Relief washed over me as I saw her familiar face. "Hey, I brought you some things," she said, holding a small bag filled with snacks, a book, and a cozy blanket. "I thought you might like a little comfort." "Thanks. You have no idea how much this means to me," I replied, taking the bag from her hands. We settled onto the bed together, the conversation flowing easily despite the tension that hung in the air. She listened as I recounted my discoveries from the notes, sharing my theories about the stranger's intentions. "I think whoever this is wants to play mind games with me," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "It's like they're taunting me, keeping me on edge." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "Maybe you should show these notes to Officer Grant. If they're all connected, it could give them something to work with." "I think you're right," I said, my heart racing at the thought of sharing my findings. "But what if it's not enough? What if they don't take it seriously?" "They will. You have to trust the police. They want to help," Sarah encouraged, squeezing my hand. We spent the next hour discussing my findings and exploring the implications of the notes. I felt a sense of camaraderie with her, and it reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. Eventually, I decided to show the notes to Officer Grant. After Sarah left, I paced the room, rehearsing how to present my findings. Would he see the urgency? Would he understand how crucial these details could be? As the evening approached, I heard the familiar soft knock on the door. It was Officer Grant, looking more determined than ever. "Ready to share what you found?" he asked, his demeanor serious yet encouraging. I took a deep breath and laid the notes out on the desk for him. As he scanned the details, I watched his expression shift from curiosity to concern. "This is good," he said, looking back at me. "You've done something important here. These observations are detailed, more than just random notes. Do you think it could lead us to the person?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "It's a strong possibility. We'll investigate this right away," he assured me, gathering the notes. As he left, I felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly drowned by the gnawing fear that came with the unknown. What if the stranger was already too close? What if they had seen me working on these notes? As darkness fell outside, I lay in bed, every creak and whisper in the house echoing ominously. My heart raced, and I struggled to find sleep. It was a long night ahead, filled with shadows and uncertainty, but I held on to the belief that perhaps I was one step closer to finding the answers I desperately sought. The next day dawned bright, but the sunshine did little to lift the heavy fog of anxiety that clung to me. I spent the morning pacing my small room, waiting for updates from Officer Grant. Each tick of the clock felt like a drumbeat of impending dread, echoing my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was still out there, watching, waiting. After a few hours, I decided to distract myself by rummaging through the belongings in the safe house. The room was sparsely furnished, but I found an old book tucked away on the shelf, a dusty mystery novel with yellowed pages. I sank into the corner of the bed, hoping to lose myself in the story. The characters faced their own mysteries, but I couldn't fully immerse myself in their plight. My mind kept drifting back to the notes, the stranger, and the impending sense of doom that loomed over me. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, shattering the silence. My heart raced as I grabbed it, half expecting a message from Officer Grant. Instead, it was a text from Sarah. "Hey, any updates? Want to meet later?" I replied quickly, telling her about the notes and how they might be connected. I showed them to Officer Grant. I typed, "He seemed interested, but I'm still anxious. Let's meet for coffee later. It'll be good to get out, even for a bit," she suggested. I hesitated, the thought of venturing out sending a fresh wave of panic through me. What if the stranger was waiting? What if they were watching me, planning their next move? But the idea of remaining cooped up in that room, trapped in my thoughts, felt unbearable. I finally texted back, "Okay, let's meet." The hours crawled by as I waited for our meeting. I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, my instincts screaming that someone was lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. I kept my curtains tightly drawn, peering out through the tiny gaps, half expecting to see the dark silhouette I had grown so accustomed to. When it was finally time to meet Sarah, I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The world felt foreign, the sunlight too bright, the air too crisp. Each passerby seemed like a potential threat, their faces blurred and unreadable. I forced myself to walk at a steady pace toward the cafe, every footfall echoing in my ears. The cafe was bustling, a sharp contrast to the quiet solitude of the safe house. As I entered, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee washed over me, providing a moment of comfort. I spotted Sarah at a corner table, her expression brightening as she waved me over. "Hey, you look like you've seen a ghost," she joked, her smile genuine but concerned. I chuckled lightly, taking a seat across from her. "You have no idea. I feel like I'm in a horror movie. I can't believe you're dealing with all this. You're so strong," she said, pouring coffee into our cups. We chatted for a while, the conversation light and easy, but I could feel my anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. I finally decided to share my thoughts. "I'm scared, Sarah. What if the stranger is close? What if they're watching me right now?" "Let's not think that way. You're in a safe place," she reassured me, though I could see the worry in her eyes. We continued talking, but the nagging feeling of dread never fully dissipated. Just as I was starting to relax, the cafe's door swung open, and I caught a glimpse of a figure standing outside. My heart dropped as I recognized the silhouette. A tall figure wearing a dark hoodie, standing motionless just beyond the glass. "Sarah, look," I gasped, pointing toward the window. She turned to see the figure, and her face paled. "Who is that?" "I don't know. It looks like," I trailed off, unable to finish my sentence. I felt paralyzed, fear constricting around my throat. The figure shifted slightly, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flash of familiar features, an outline that sent a chill down my spine. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, but before I could snap a picture, the figure turned and disappeared into the crowd. "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "I don't know. It felt like they were watching us. I think we should go." "Let's head back to the safe house," she suggested, her voice steady, yet laced with concern. I nodded, feeling the urgency of the moment. We paid for our drinks and hurried out of the cafe, my heart racing as we walked briskly down the street. I glanced over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting the figure to reappear. As we reached the entrance of the safe house, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Once inside, I shut the door behind me, locking it securely. Sarah stood beside me, her brow furrowed. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I need to tell Officer Grant about what I saw. If it was a stranger, I can't take any chances," I replied, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. We quickly settled in the small living room, and I dialed Officer Grant's number, my hands shaking. When he answered, I could hear the concern in his voice. "What's going on?" "I think I saw the stranger outside the cafe. They were just standing there, watching," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to get a description." "Can you remember anything about them?" he asked urgently. I couldn't see their face. They were wearing a hoodie, but they felt familiar. "Like I've seen them before," I replied, the memory of that figure sending chills down my spine. "Okay, stay inside and lock all the doors. I'll be there as soon as I can. We'll figure this out," he reassured me. As I hung up, I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I glanced at Sarah, who was visibly shaken. "What if they're really watching us? We have to stay alert. Let's not panic. We'll keep each other safe," she said, her voice steadying me. The evening stretched on, filled with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. We stayed close, talking softly, trying to distract ourselves from the looming dread. But the shadows outside felt thicker, and the silence felt heavier, as if the night itself was conspiring against us. As the night deepened, the tension in the safe house grew palpable. The darkness outside felt oppressive, each creak of the floorboards echoing ominously through the silence. I found myself glancing toward the windows frequently, half expecting to see the figure reappear. Sarah sat beside me on the couch, her presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone in this nightmare. "What do you think they want?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Maybe they just want to scare me," I replied, my heart pounding as I recalled the chilling feeling of being watched. "But it feels more sinister than that." Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the door. My heart leaped into my throat, and I exchanged a frightened glance with Sarah. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I nodded, holding my breath as the noise continued. I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins, my instincts screaming at me to do something. "We need to hide," I said urgently, looking around the room for a place to take cover. "No, we need to see who it is," Sarah insisted, her determination mixed with fear. I hesitated, the urge to flee battling with the desire to confront whatever was out there. Finally, I relented. "Okay, but we need to be careful." We crept toward the front door, our hearts racing in unison. As I peered through the peephole, my stomach dropped at the sight of a shadowy figure standing just outside. They were wearing a dark hoodie, the familiar outline sending chills down my spine. "Who is it?" Sarah whispered, leaning closer. "I can't tell. It's too dark," I replied, feeling the tension build as the figure shifted slightly, glancing around as if searching for something. My pulse quickened as I recalled the figure I'd seen outside the cafe earlier. Suddenly, the figure turned toward the door, and I felt a rush of panic. "We need to call Officer Grant," I exclaimed, scrambling back to grab my phone. But before I could dial, the figure raised their hand and knocked firmly on the door. The sound reverberated through the house, and I froze, paralyzed by fear. "Open up. I know you're in there," a voice called, muffled but unmistakably threatening. My breath quickened as I exchanged frantic glances with Sarah. "What do we do?" she hissed. "Do we answer?" I asked, my voice shaky. "No, just stay quiet," she urged, her eyes darting to the windows. The figure knocked again, more insistently this time. "I know you're home. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The voice was low and menacing, sending a chill down my spine. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my racing heart. "I'm calling the police," I whispered to Sarah, dialing Officer Grant's number with trembling fingers. 911. "What's your emergency?" A calm voice answered on the other end. "There's someone outside my house. Someone threatening me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stay inside and lock all doors and windows. Help is on the way." "Can you see the person?" the operator asked. I nodded, though they couldn't see me. "Yes, but they're just standing there. Try to stay quiet and calm. Help will be there soon," the operator said before hanging up. I felt a mix of relief and fear. I turned to Sarah, who was staring wide-eyed at the door. "They're still out there," I said. "I don't like this," she whispered, backing away from the door. Suddenly, the figure banged on the door again, more forcefully this time. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk," they shouted, their voice ringing with an eerie calmness. I swallowed hard, torn between the instinct to flee and the urge to confront. "What do we do?" I asked Sarah, feeling the panic rise. "We can't just sit here. We need to find a way out," she urged, her voice rising slightly. Just then, a loud crash came from the back of the house, causing us both to jump. "What was that?" I gasped. "I don't know. We need to check," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. Against my better judgment, I nodded, and we crept cautiously toward the back of the house. The sound had come from the kitchen, and as we approached, I felt a chill run down my spine. We peeked around the corner to find the back door swinging open, the wind howling through the gap. "They're inside," I whispered in horror. Sarah nodded, backing away slowly. "We need to hide now." I grabbed her hand, leading her to a small closet in the hallway. We squeezed inside, the cramped space filled with darkness. I held my breath, straining to hear anything beyond the thundering of my own heart. Footsteps echoed through the house, slow and deliberate. I could feel the tension in the air, thick with dread. Whoever it was, they were searching, their presence looming over us like a storm cloud ready to burst. "What do they want?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but we have to stay quiet," I urged, trying to keep my voice steady. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped outside the closet door. My heart raced as I felt the weight of the moment. Were they about to open the door? I held my breath, listening as the figure shifted, the sound of their movements sending shivers down my spine. "I know you're in there," the voice called softly, almost mockingly. "You can't hide from me forever." Panic surged through me, and I squeezed Sarah's hand tightly. "We can't let them find us," I whispered fiercely. Just as the figure began to reach for the door handle, the sound of sirens pierced the air, echoing through the house. Relief washed over me, but the figure froze, their hand hovering just above the knob. "Stay right there," the voice commanded, but I could hear the tremor of uncertainty beneath their calm facade. The sirens grew louder, the flashing lights illuminating the house. "This is the police. Come out with your hands up," a voice shouted from outside. In that moment, the figure hesitated, and then suddenly bolted away, their footsteps pounding down the hall. I gasped, feeling a surge of adrenaline as I flung the closet door open. "Quick, they're getting away," I urged, grabbing Sarah's hand and rushing out of the closet. We sprinted toward the front door, the sound of the police officers shouting outside urging us on. As we burst through the door, we found a group of officers swarming the yard, flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Where did they go?" one officer shouted, scanning the area. "I saw them run toward the back," I exclaimed, pointing toward the shadows behind the house. The officers moved quickly, their flashlights sweeping the area as they fanned out, searching for any sign of the stranger. My heart raced as I watched them, hoping they would catch whoever had invaded our sanctuary. As I stood there, shaking with adrenaline, I caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. "Over there," I shouted, pointing toward the figure darting between the trees. The officers took off in pursuit, their footsteps thundering against the ground. I felt a mix of fear and relief, hoping they would finally bring this nightmare to an end. After what felt like an eternity, an officer returned, breathing heavily. "We lost them. They're gone." "No, they can't get away," I shouted, my voice filled with frustration. "We'll continue the search, but we need to take your statements first," the officer said, his expression serious. As we retreated back inside, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The reality of the night washed over me, and I sank onto the couch, trembling. "What just happened?" I muttered, staring blankly at the floor. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, concern etched on her face. "I don't know. I thought we were safe," I whispered, the fear still gripping my heart. The officer took notes as we recounted the events of the night, but it all felt surreal, like a dark dream I couldn't wake up from. Once he finished, he reassured us, "We'll increase patrols in the area. If you see anything else, don't hesitate to call." As the officer left, I turned to Sarah. "What if they come back?" "We'll deal with that when it happens. For now, let's try to get some rest, she said softly, though I could see the fear in her eyes. With the adrenaline fading, exhaustion set in, but as I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me. I kept replaying the events in my mind, the figure's voice echoing in my ears. It felt like the end of one nightmare, but the beginning of another. Tomorrow would come, but I had no idea what it would bring. All I could do was hope that the stranger would stay away, and that I would finally find some peace. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.